Order. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Public Bills Committee for March 18, 2025 to order, and I'd like to welcome everyone to One Government Place. My name is MLA John White, and I'll be today's chair for this morning anyway. I'd ask that each of the members for public council today to identify themselves, starting with the government MLAs on my left.
My name is Diane Timmons. I'm the MLA for Victoria the Lakes.
Good morning, Julie Van Exen, MLA for King South.
Good morning, Rick Burns, MLA for Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
Good morning, Tim Outhet for Halifax, for Bedford Basin.
It's okay. We still got time. Good morning, Derek Mummercut, MLA for Sydney, Member 2.
Good morning, Susie Hanson, MLA for Halifax, Needham.
Good morning, Paul Wozni, MLA, Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you. And on my left, I'm joined by Legislative Counsel Killian Schlemmer, and on my right is Gordon Head. So today we are doing these bills. I'd like to start with some housekeeping items, sorry. I'd ask everyone in the room to turn off their phones or put them on silent. In case of emergency, we go out the door that we entered in through the left, on the left-hand side, up to Granville Street and up to Grand Parade. I'd ask that anyone in the audience please refrain from taking pictures or videos and from showing their approval or denial of anything that's being said in the House. Taking pictures or videos is not permitted. And finally, presenters are not to use any props. So today's agenda, we have a variety of bills going through here that are some 15 minutes, some 10. I'll try to tell you folks before they start so you'll know what you have in front of you. See if I can remember that. So, first bill up will be, let me see, this one, right? Bill number 12, Advanced Education and Research, an act respecting. And our first presenter is a 15-minute presenter, and it's Peter McInnis, virtual. Hello, Mr. McInnis.
Morning.
You're ready to start. You have 10 minutes for a presentation typically and 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you to the members of this committee for listening to the collective voices of Nova Scotians. I'm Dr. Peter McInnis, President of the Canadian Association of University Teachers. We represent over 75,000 members at 130 universities and colleges across Canada. My remarks will be focused entirely on Bill 12, an act respecting advanced education and research. As you know, Bill 12 has 4 main components, and I wish to address each in turn as they affect important principles related to university governance, independence, and financial viability. The first of which is the expansion of degree granting privileges to NSCC. There is obvious concerns about credential overlap between universities and colleges as they may become a zero-sum prospect with enrollment. It is unclear from the bill whether the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission, the MPHEC, will vet new degree streams to ensure quality and consistency with existing options. It is noted that the bill removes the obligation to appoint college academic staff members to the boards, thus weakening representation related to governance. Governance is the theme that will be emphasized later in this presentation. In terms of research, Nova Scotia Corporation, the bill allows the minister to determine key research priorities of the province and to set terms and conditions for annual grants. This reduction in the independence of Nova Scotia research is of concern. Most of these grants are focused on healthcare and environmental science projects. These grants are often paired with federal monies through the Canada Foundation for Innovation, and there is a question whether provincial priorities will interfere with CFI applications. This province's legislation should be attentive to areas which may conflict with federal tri-council granting entities so as not to disadvantage our scholars. The importance here is the expert peer review procedures to assess highly technical and specialized applications. This is a long-established process that works effectively. For example, I recently completed an assessment for one of the federal tri-council agencies, and the application under consideration was looked at from multiple levels, from the feasibility, the training opportunities for students, to expected outcomes. As stated, this is work best left to academics. We are currently experiencing incidences of political interference in the province of Alberta, and most notably in the United States, with resulting widespread disruption of research areas. Therefore, caution is necessary in this regard. This is not to suggest the governments have no practical role in advanced education, but rather a balance must be sought between oversight and interference. The question here is, does Bill 12 achieve this balance? In terms of University Board Governance Act, this section of the bill indicates that education and training will be provided on board governance. This includes conflicts of interest, confidentiality, risk management, and codes of conduct. The issue here is the manner in which boards of governance are already educated and trained new board members. So what we're seeing, and we're having reports from new board members joining at Mount St. Vincent University and Dalhousie, they're being instructed by outside consultants that their mere presence on the board is a conflict of interest, and that they may not communicate with their own colleagues. Meetings are held in camera and not made public, and so we're really seeing a degradation of transparency already, and we're concerned that Bill 12, which caps the number of board representatives at 30, and allows, as you know, up to 50% of this number to be appointed by the government. This will be a reduction in the ability of the board to perform its fiduciary duties. There is a functional bicameral system of governance at our universities. I'm speaking here of the importance of senates for academic issues, and this should not be altered or bypassed. I know that the Association of Nova Scotia University Teachers, NSET, appeared before your committee last evening. I would note that they made a survey of board practices in Nova Scotia. This is a 2021-2022 report, and this is available and should be consulted in relation to Bill 12. Finally, the University and Accountability Sustainability Act. This is the component of Bill 12 that concerns us the most, and it resurrects Nova Scotia Bill 100 from 2015, altering it in some aspects, and the language that CUT found so objectionable 10 years ago. Whereas Bill 100 offered financial restructuring processes that were optional, Bill 12 now provides the Minister of Advanced Education with the power to compel universities to enter a revitalization plan. Here, revitalization sounds perhaps innocuous or anodyne, like a trip to a day spa, but in reality, this revitalization could be severe for several reasons, including closing or amalgamating programs or the abrogation of existing collective agreements. We're currently seeing this happening at York University in Toronto, where they've closed admissions to new students in the fall of this year in 19 or 20 programs. So this is a concern for us in Nova Scotia. The legislation requires that universities ordered into the process, and I quote from the bill, provide a plan satisfactory to the minister that identifies a strategic connection between the social and economic priorities. I would say that again, social and economic priorities of the government and the university's funding decisions. This is a very broad definition, subject to ministerial discretion. If a university fails to meet this requirement as determined by the minister, the existing and future provincial funding can be withdrawn. This is a power accorded to no other province and would force universities to restructure according to government directions. So this is unique. This also specifies persons with whom the university must consult, that is, private consultants. The use of such consultants in other provinces has proven to be extremely problematic and exorbitantly expensive for services rendered. The example that's not in Bill 12, but it's referred to in the Auditor General's report of this month, of Laurentian University being forced into bankruptcy proceedings starting in February of 2021 through the Companies Creditors Arrangements Act, known as the CCAA. This is a federal law designed to deal with private for-profit corporations. And of course, people are hearing about Hudson's Bay Company in the news. The CCA is being applied in that instance, but such restructuring is inappropriate for advanced education and always places employees at the back of the line when receiving compensation. So the concern here is that our members, faculty members, will be, if there was an invocation of Bill 12 as written, they could find themselves subject to something like the CCAA for decisions that they were not party, decisions made by senior administrators in government. The CCAA is now excluded from use of universities and colleges. The primary reason is it brought about more complications than it solved. The Auditor General's report of Ontario, released in November of 2022, made these points very clearly. Then Auditor General Bonnie Lysak stated it was not faculty salaries that forced Laurentian into trouble, it was administrative decisions. Recent caps in international student visas have laid bare the unsustainability of using this stream of tuition revenue to force universities to finance universities. And there's plenty of blame to go around. So why Bill 12? Why at this point, and what portion of it is necessary? I would also note that there was no consultation. The university presidents noted that their body, the Council of Nova Scotia University Presidents concept, was not consulted, nor any other groups, faculty associations, students, or community groups. So in conclusion, the just released Auditor General's report on funding of Nova Scotia universities suggests that a revised formula for funding be explored, but it also suggests that universities are a cost burden to the province. The Canadian Association of University Teachers feels that Bill 12 represents a problematic solution to an ongoing issue of sustainable funding and effective governance for Nova Scotia universities. We recommend this legislation be amended to take into account the views of educational professionals to ensure that our province does not set an ill-advised precedent for undue intervention in the functioning of post-secondary institutions. Our system of universities and colleges is a strength and a means to ensure our citizens, mostly young people, have a pathway to success. In that respect, advanced education is the social determinant of health and well-being. We must continue to invest in education. Thank you.
Floor is open for questions. MLA Wozni.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. McInnis, for your presentation here virtually. Bill 12 has overlapping features that should be taken into consideration rather than thought of as piecemeal or separate. These are some, but not all. The ability to force a university into revitalization, even against its will. The ability to control half a university's board by placing public servants employed under threat of termination without cause. And the ability to force universities to allocate fiscal resources towards government flag priorities rather than priorities self-determined by the institution. If this bill is passed without amendment, what long-term consequences do you foresee around recruitment and retention of both faculty and students at Nova Scotia universities? You can just share your expert thoughts on that question. We'd appreciate that.
Thank you for the question.
Dr. McInnis.
I'm sorry.
Just have to recognize you for the recording. Recognize Dr. McInnis.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Well, we're seeing this most egregiously in the United States, in the state of Florida. We're seeing academics leaving that state because of government interference in the most extreme version. But we're really seeing this also in Alberta. As I mentioned, they brought in something called Bill 18, started to vet federal grants through the Tri-Council. So I think this is going to be a problem with recruitment and retention, especially of star scholars that can go to other provinces or other countries. And we need to make sure that we have advantages of Nova Scotia universities. As I said, it's a great system that we've built. But we have to be careful to nurture it. And Bill 12 poses a really concerning threat. And as I said, a precedent that shouldn't be repeated across the country.
MLA Mumbercat.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for your presentation. I just have a question. And I've talked to a number of advocates within the post-secondary education sector. Have you had a chance to talk to the government about some of the concerns that you're presenting here in front of the committee today? There seems to be a theme where people have tried that and they're not getting a response.
I recognize Dr. McInnis.
We have not been able to speak with the government, and there has been some lack of consultation, as I said in my presentation, even within the stakeholders in the province, let alone the national bodies. So this bill seems to come, the impetus seems to come from the Premier's office itself, and so there's some concern here what's actually driving this. At this point, it poses more of a question rather than something that we know that is going to have a detrimental outcome. But there's a lot of potential here for disruption, serious disruption of our advanced educational system in the province. So it is a significant concern, and we have not been consulted.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I have no other names on the board, so I can recognize Emily Wasney.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. McInnis, you alluded to the Auditor General's report on university funding. We note that report made no comment on university governance structures, but did identify a number of flags in terms of accountability for significant funding that the province provides to Nova Scotia universities. In your opinion, are there tools and structures outside of legislation that offer the government a path towards enhanced accountability without enacting Bill 12, currently in place?
I recognize Dr. McInnis with 30 seconds remaining.
Yeah, I think, as I said, the existing bicameral system of governance at universities and colleges is effective, and Senate is the best place for academic decision-making, but also boards have a significant corporate representation and community representation as existing. So I don't know if the appointees of up to 50% is advisable. So we do have accountability, and of course the government sets the budget and the allocation to universities according to its mandate.
Order.
But the system is existing.
Order, please. Sorry, Dr. McInnis, your time has finished, come to an end. We are on a tight schedule, so I have to move on to the next presenter. Thank you very much for coming today. Appreciate your information. Next up, we have Kathy Conrad, President of St. Mary's Faculty Union, and it will be a 15-minute presentation.
I'll hand that to you.
Other paper.
No, as soon as I recognize you, the mic will turn red, and then you can speak. I recognize Kathy Conrad.
Thank you so much. A quick scan of the members of this committee. I recognize that there are alumni from Dalhousie University, Mount St. Vincent University, Cape Breton University, hopefully some SMU alum as well. Well, hello. My name is Dr. Kathy Conrad. I represent approximately 300 faculty and academic librarians. I've been a prof at SMU for 25 years. I've secured multi-million dollars in national research funding, and I have served as an international consultant to national governments and agencies, including the Government of Canada, the Government of Sweden, the Government of the Gambia, and most recently, the European Union. I don't normally wear a hoodie to a meeting like this, but I'm representing. So I have also dedicated my career to advancing higher education in the province of Nova Scotia. I live in Sambro, Nova Scotia, and I think we all need to say I am Canadian. My MLA, however, Mr. Brendan McGuire, who is also the Minister of Advanced Education, will not meet with me to discuss Bill 12. I have phoned, I have emailed, I have asked. I have also used Facebook because he has Googled me on Facebook and found me and made a dig at me, which I find highly unprofessional. However, I have 3 points that I would really like to make to the committee. Those 3 points falling under the themes of 1, lack of prior consultation with the academic community, Secondly, our universities know how to do their jobs. This bill will set us on what I am calling a chaos course. And thirdly, university autonomy matters. So to go to the first point in terms of lack of consultation, I mentioned my own personal story, but we can assume that the Auditor General's report was the basis for Bill 12. And the Auditor General's report was welcomed. It's critical, but we have to appreciate criticism and respect the critique and do better. And I think that, maybe to be constructive here, Bill 12 was an effort to address the Auditor General's report. And yet, some of the most critical components of the report are not addressed, namely Section 1.2 of the Auditor General's report, whereby it states that some universities are underfunded. That's ignored by the bill. And on the other end of the spectrum, Section 7A of Bill 12 includes matters that are not identified in the Auditor General's report, namely the requirement that funding of research advance key provincial priorities. Universities are constantly engaged in critical thinking and debate. Why would there have been none with regards to this bill? The second theme of concern relates to our universities, with all due respect, not the government, know how to do the job. The province purports to change university governance in two ways in Bill 12. First, it gives itself the power to tie funding to, quote, the social and economic priorities of the government. My concern and the concern of my members is that the focus in future will be perhaps on STEM programs, not that there's any problem with STEM programs. I have served in the Faculty of Science and Arts, both at St. Mary's, but to the detriment of liberal arts programs. Goodbye classics, goodbye languages. Second, the government has increased its presence on boards of governors, possibly up to 50%, to ensure that the board carries out, quote, the social and economic priorities of the government. And this really usurps the role of university senates and boards. Universities have a senate and a board of governors. The Senate is the principal academic body in all universities, and certainly in Nova Scotia. The Senate, consisting of the professoriate, decides on the types of courses and departments that exist in the university. What will the role of academic senates be in terms of Bill 12? This bill will immediately set universities on a chaos course for the indefinite future. Consultation could have and still would avoid such scenarios. I'm going to go off script here for a second and tell you that just yesterday I was in a meeting with senior administrators at my university who have put pause on operations that are critical to engaging with equity, diversity, and inclusion on our board and on search committees for senior academic members because, in their opinion, we can't talk about anything until we see what's happening with Bill 12 because it's going to turn us upside down and inside out. They won't talk publicly as I am because I don't think I'm throwing anyone under the bus because I'm not disclosing a name, but they said, Kathy, you have the privilege of going and talking. We can't because we're worried about our funding. We're worried. So senior administrators may be advocating behind the scenes, but they won't sit here on a mic because they're worried that if SMU comes or the Mount comes or CBU comes, they're not going to be friends with the current government. Thirdly, actually, I'm not finished my second point. I'm watching my time. I'm good for time. A recent study on, and this is the title, Public Attitudes of Post-Secondary Education in Canada. That was conducted in May 2024, surveying 2,500 Canadians across the political spectrum. It was done across Canada, Conservatives, Liberals, NDP. So really, it wasn't a partisan initiative. But it concludes many things, including a strong consensus that provincial governments should stay out of the day-to-day operations of universities. And yet, also, representatives from the Canadian Association of University Teachers, like my colleague, Dr. McInnis, concluded that Bill 12 represents one of the biggest overreaches of political interference in higher education in Canadian history. Let that sink in for a minute. Finally, my last point around university autonomy matters. For over 50 years, St. Mary's has exercised autonomous collegial management. What has changed to justify political interference in the affairs of our university? Universities exist to teach students how to think and provide a broad and disparate base of knowledge. Whether a particular program will lead to a particular job has rarely been the object of any university at the undergraduate level. The Senate and the board are expertly suited to that task. They must be autonomous. Community colleges teach students how to perform particular crafts or trades or jobs, which is fantastic. Provincial expertise is welcomed in those areas. Research has shown that political interference in higher education has ultimately limited institutional autonomy to the detriment of society, quoting Darian Smith, 2024. And recent actions eroding institutional autonomy south of our border should raise alarms. As much as staff and spokespersons try to reassure us that this bill will not, nor has any intentions to erode academic freedom, so I did make a phone call and I did get through to some staff in the Department of Higher Education, Advanced Education. I pleaded to leave them, and I have left the message for Mr., I've given him a promotion, Mr. McGuire, to give me a call back. He has not. But they said, we don't intend to erode academic freedom. We're not closing down programs or amalgamate universities. Of course not. So I'm hearing these reassurances. The problem is that the bill opens the door for all of that. Your constituents are not being served well by allowing this bill to proceed as written. As we unite as Canadians against the nonsensical actions of our Southern leadership, why in this moment on earth would we embrace a bill that so clearly resembles the political interference in higher education in many United States today? One of my colleagues, Dr. John Warner, writes that faculty resistance to impositions on their rights and authorities should be defended every step of the way. We can put forward the proof, which isn't actually hard because it's overwhelmingly true, that Nova Scotia universities deserve support for their missions in tandem with appropriate oversight rather than being subject to arbitrary and partisan political control. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Looking for questions. MLA Timmins.
Can I call you Kathy? Of course you can. Kathy. In the past, I'm just going to read Clause 18. It states, removing the ability of the Minister of Finance and Treasury Board to enter into an agreement for the deposit of money into Research Opportunity Fund and replace it with the ability for the Minister of Advanced Education to make grants subject to terms and conditions. Has St. Mary's, applied for grants in the past? Hasn't that been a procedure for many years that universities do apply for grants?
Yes.
I recognize Dr. Conrad.
Thank you so much. So it's not in my bailiwick to be involved in securing the funding for St. Mary's. So, I can't speak to the details of what that looks like and feels like, but certainly universities do receive grants. What is unique here is that the requirement to be tied to political priorities. So to be specific there, if a political priority is not a school of the environment, let's say, and it's healthcare, as it should be, but if you're at a university that doesn't offer nursing and dentistry and teaching and routes that take you from a program that leads to a specific outcome in a career, the concern there is, what about the general liberal arts programs, the programs that allow students to think critically and take them through, social justice or towards law, or to, maybe what you start, many of us all have these experiences, what you start out with in universities and where you come out at the end of your 4 or 5 years there. So having grants that are tied to political priorities is so problematic because, what happens when most of what you offer in your institution isn't connected directly to a quote-unquote political priority? I don't know if that's answering your question or not, but the immediate piece is, yes, of course, we do rely on funding from political grants, of course, yes. Thank you.
I recognize MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Conrad, I too am concerned. I've received hundreds of emails from professors, from academics, from anyone who has analyzed this particular bill, and none of it has shown any advantages to the universities. Like, for example, instead of continuing to put stipulations on the funding, they could have said, we will provide funding, because I've heard last night that funding has gone down years after years after years. So it's not like they're providing more funding and then asking for seats at the table. I don't think that that's the problem. The problem is that, and from what I'm hearing, is that from your standpoint, as well as a number of other academics, is the liberal arts and the social justice programs, the DEI options, the diversity in the schools, the options that make universities so great may possibly be limited and may possibly be taken in ways for political realm. Like, if this government chooses to want to, only deal with minerals or critical whatever, they will focus directly on that and take away all these other programs that are truly beneficial for students and for the well-being of our Canadian citizenship. So I say this because, for me, I don't see any advantages coming from this bill. And to your point, and to many others' points here, there hasn't been that discussion. I'm just curious to know, is there anything that you see out of this bill that could have been discussed and there could have been some conversation about through the colleges and universities that this government could have done things differently to maybe consult or to have the input from the universities to be able to create that? I'm curious to know, is that something that would have been helpful? Is that something that would have maybe brought something different to the table? I don't know if that's clear in what I'm trying to come across, but I feel like we're going to lose so much more than gaining when this bill passes, and I don't think people quite understand, how much more we will lose just based on what we see with this bill today.
With 1 minute, 20 seconds remaining, I recognize Dr. Conrad.
Yeah, I agree completely and wholeheartedly. The auditor, I mentioned the Auditor General's report has some really great recommendations, and it has some really important conclusions. And I think in the document that I've shared with you, I preface by saying that we welcome transparency. We welcome, I've been critical of my own university and my own university leadership publicly. And so, if this bill could, speak to some of those areas of transparency, disclosure of improvements in disclosure of minutes of Board of Governors meetings and so on. In the absence of consultation, however, if it passes, we really will be in chaos. We will not know how to function in our Senate, in our board. Everything inside, in terms of the internal operations of the university, will come to a complete halt. So I don't know whether people really understand how devastating this is in terms of the day-to-day operations of the university. Transparency and disclosure and funding, which again is huge. That's great, and I think that there's lots of room for improvement here. But what's not great is that this will bring us to a
Order. Sorry, Dr. Conrad. We do have a tight agenda today, so I will move on to the next presenter. Thank you for coming in today. Our next presenter is Maren Mealey, and it's a 15-minute presentation.
Hi, folks.
Hello, Maren. I recognize Maren Mealey.
Thank you. I don't anticipate using up the entirety of your 15 minutes. I'm Maren Mealey. I'm a student at Dalhousie. I'm also a resident here in the north end of Halifax. And thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm a Sustainability and International Development Studies student at University of Dalhousie, and I'm here because of my deep concern on Bill 12, the act representing respecting advanced education and research. I echo the same thoughts as Kathy, that I do care deeply about university transparency. I think that's really important. But I think that this bill grants the Nova Scotian government unprecedented authority over universities and higher education institutions, and demonstrates a clear threat to academic freedom and government overreach. There are two key issues I'd like to highlight. First is that the bill gives the Minister of Advanced Education the sole power to set provincial research priorities, requiring Research Nova Scotia to align its work with those priorities or risk losing funding. This risks stifling academic freedom and devaluing research that doesn't align with whatever the government decides are its interests. I believe that academic freedom is a cornerstone of higher education. It allows students, professors, and researchers to explore complex and often controversial issues without fear of political interference. It enables students to engage with diverse perspectives and develop the critical thinking skills needed to address the urgent crises and challenges that we're all aware that we're facing. And by centralizing control over research priorities, Bill 12 threatens to erode this freedom. And at its worst, which I don't anticipate will happen underneath this government, but I think that at its worst, it could turn universities into extensions of government agendas rather than independent communities of knowledge and innovation. Research priorities should be determined by researchers and not by politicians. As an international development student, this is particularly concerning to me and other people in my field. Research in my field often addresses global injustices, but under Bill 12, such work could be deemed irrelevant to Nova Scotians and could lose support despite its critical focus on issues like migrations, human rights, and global policy. This would deprive our province of valuable insights and limit our ability to engage with global challenges. Second, I'm alarmed by this bill's impact on university governance. It allows the minister to appoint up to half of a university's board of governors, creating a majority that may not prioritize the institution, let alone students' best interests. I believe that the government should not be able to dictate the entirety of university operations, but that the board of governors' independence must be crucial to maintaining the integrity of our institutions. This undermines the board's independence and opens up the door to political interference in university operations. While this government may intend to promote accountability, which I said before, I'm a big fan of accountability in our universities, the bill sets a dangerous precedent. Future administrations could abuse this overreach, and I'm sure you are all aware of how this is happening to the South in the United States, where political influence has undermined research on climate change, on reproductive health, on racial equity. To the South, we're witnessing governments actively target and criminalize university students exercising their freedoms to protest on campus. Universities are becoming battlegrounds for freedom of expression, and students like me fear similar outcomes here. This is not the future I want for Nova Scotia. This is not the future my community wants for Nova Scotia. And speaking on behalf of other students I know don't want this future for Nova Scotia either. The legislation would set a dangerous pathway for future governments to follow similar courses of action here at home. To all of you, I urge you to consider the consequences of this bill. Nova Scotia's universities are more than economic engines. They are hubs of innovation, creativity, and critical thought. By imposing narrow research priorities and undermining governance, Bill 12 threatens to erode academic freedom while diminishing the global competitiveness of our institutions and deterring top talent. Many of my peers wanted to be here today, but Tuesday morning is not exactly prime time for university students to be up here. So instead of being in class today, I'm here not because I love skipping class or talking about legislation on my Monday mornings or Tuesday mornings, but because I care deeply about the student community and our academic freedoms. I call on you to repeal this bill and encourage you to engage in meaningful consultation with students, faculty members, administrations to develop a better framework that balances accountability with the autonomy our institutions need to thrive. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Ms. Mealey. I recognize MLA Member Cat.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. And I really don't have more. It's more of a comment, and you can respond. You're absolutely right. The theme of all of the bills that we've had is essentially that there's been no consultation on anything. Really, and now we're here in the process. And we've seen the government pull back time and time again when it comes to the bills that they've presented. I served on the Senate at CBU way back when, and that's really the identity of the university. That's where the student representation truly lies and how the university operates. So we all have the concern around the fact that the government could appoint so many people and really drive the process. If there was anything, I guess I'll ask you a question, and I appreciate you coming here from the student perspective, because I think that the government really lost that in the whole idea of this bill. If there's one thing that they could change out of this today, what would it be for you?
If there's one thing.
I recognize Ms. Mealey.
Yeah, I think I pointed out the two main concerns that I have with this being around funding being tied to government priorities and the Board of Governors. I think the Board of Governors being able to be represented by 50% of appointees by the minister is truly one of the most concerning elements of this to me, because the Board of Governors sets about just about all of the government operations. I know as a student, there's a lot of students who are currently engaged in trying to aim for there to be more student voices and representation on the Board of Governors. I know at Dalhousie, the Board of Governors is an area where a lot of students don't feel represented. There's a lot of concern that further representation by the government will ostracize us students even more from that. You spoke about how the government seems to not be super tapped into what students are concerned about in this area, and I think that's deeply concerning. In my opinion, obviously I'm biased as a student, but universities are meant to be for students and for learning. And so if you're not consulting with your students at the university operations level, but also at the government level when you're making policies about students, I think that's incredibly troubling. And so I think the risk of having less student voice representation on the Board of Governors, of having people who are further removed from the student experience, is something that concerns me a lot. I would like to see that change.
I recognize MLA Wozni.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the official oppositions critic for advanced education, and just before I ask my question, I'll note that one of the features of this bill is that it will allow for student representation, but student representation already exists on every Board of Governors in every Nova Scotia university. It's not fixing a problem that exists. It sounds to me that your decision to attend Dal to pursue international development studies is grounded in strong principles and values of freedom, equity, and social justice, and then an important part of your choice to study at Dal is that it operates in a fashion that appeals to your values and your ethics. You've expressed your deep concern about how this legislation would change the way your university operates under your feet while you study, and how that might impact your ability to learn in an environment that's not dictated or altered by partisan politics. Maren, if this legislation is passed without amendment, as a student, how might your decision to attend a Nova Scotia university to study and make your life be impacted? And how might you counsel other students considering attending university in our province?
I recognize Ms. Mealey.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I'll figure it out eventually. I appreciate it. Yeah, I definitely think that, especially in the international developments field, this is something that a lot of us are talking about. I engaged in some conversations with my profs recently, other students recently, who are concerned. There's one prof who anecdotally spoke to me about her area of research lies in children in detention centers along the U.S.-Mexico border, and she's run into issues receiving funding on that here at Dalhousie because it's not deemed as being relevant to Nova Scotians. I think a lot of us agree, though, that the issues of global migration impact us deeply here, just as they impact anyone anywhere else in the world. I am going to be wrapping up my degree probably in a year and a half. I've taken some time to do it. But if this goes ahead, I will definitely not be keen on doing any further education here, especially because of the instability that it could cause. And I would likely counsel other students who I know are concerned about issues of academic freedom, who are in the field of international development, to do the same. But I love Nova Scotia. I've lived here since 2019. I love living here. My family is from here. So that would be a really unfortunate situation to be put in a situation where I am concerned about the future of a degree while also feeling deeply tied to this community. Yeah. Not a very eloquent answer, but that's the situation.
I recognize MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for coming and giving us a different viewpoint. Because, as we hear from a number of folks across this province, it's always good for us to hear from folks from every facet, right? I say this because when we heard from other folks about this bill, there's a theme here, like we're not listening. The government is not doing their due diligence and consulting. They're not actually, making changes that are going to be for the better of Nova Scotians. And so, when we see a bill come forward that will affect our young people's education and our future's educations, it's very troubling to see that, the listening ears aren't turned on and they're not actually paying attention to exactly what people are saying that are in this field, that are first voice, that are having these experiences. I say this because I don't ever want you to feel discouraged by the decisions of a government that's going to make, not really good ones for the future of what's happening right now, but know that there are people behind the scenes that are working really hard to help change the way that we see the view on these things. So I don't want you to be discouraged and not leave Nova Scotia because the North End's the best. But I just want to say that I appreciate you coming here and speaking up for other students, because we need to hear these voices. And as well, I appreciate hearing from teachers and administrators and all of those folks who are a part of this world that are going to be affected firsthand. So if there was anything that you could change about this bill, what would you do?
I recognize Ms. Mealey with 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate your comments. I think if there's anything that I could change about this bill, I'm coming back to this idea. I don't want to see this bill go forward without the proper consultation. It seems, I came here not very long ago. I heard one speaker, but it seems like it's been a theme that people care about accountability and care about transparency. And I think that's something that students can get behind. I think that sounds like something that I can't see faculty having issues with or administrators having issues with. But I think the problem is that this clearly is out of touch with the desires of faculty, of students. And I think that what needs to change is meaningful consultation. Students are afraid about academic freedoms. In the heart of academia. Clearly, it's not doing the intended purpose. And I think that if there was anything that could be changed, it would be to remove these elements that we're concerned about being government overreach, these issues of funding being tied to government priorities, and of the Board of Governors being able to be appointed up to half by the minister. Yeah, accountability is awesome, but a lack of actual consultation in any meaningful sense with students, I think is a real issue. And I think as well, students don't necessarily understand currently that this is an issue because people aren't always plugged into provincial politics, but it impacts them deeply, especially students where there's a lot of folks who come from Ontario or come from further out west. They're not going to be paying a lot of attention to what's happening on the provincial level, but they'll feel these impacts and they'll feel these changes. And also having a meeting on Tuesday morning, I understand the difficulties and restraints here, but if you're seeking more student input, this might not be the time and place for it. There might be better ways to engage with students to ensure that they feel represented by policy that's being made about them. I think that any decisions about students shouldn't be made without students being part of it. Sort of answered your question, but I think that's what I'll leave you with there.
Still 120. 120 remaining. Any further questions? I recognize MLA Mumbercat.
Just very briefly, you have 1:20 left, so I'll give it to you. But I think it's important that to have the student perspective in it. And listen, I appreciate, we all appreciate that you coming in and taking the time to do it. So I'll leave the last few minutes to you if you want to make any closing comments.
I recognize Ms. Mealey with 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, thank you all for allowing me to speak today. Yeah, you've heard me talk about this. I really want to drill home that students are concerned about academic freedoms, and especially students who are currently engaged in campus politics. A lot of us are watching what's happening down to the south and being incredibly concerned. We're seeing students who we can very likely see our friends being part of, being detained without following any due process currently. We're seeing people at risk of deportation. And this is something that we want to avoid here. And while it might not necessarily be imminent, this bill opens up the doors for similar situations to happen. I also have friends who are studying in the water industry, and they're seeing their friends down south being defunded. There's not enough research to do research on lead in drinking water, which is an issue that we should care about, obviously. But we're seeing a lot of issues around funding being cut. And again, I don't want to be a slippery slope person.
Order, please. Thank you for coming in. Next, we have Daryl Woer, virtual presentation, 15 minutes. Mr. Woer, can you turn your camera on, please?
Can you see me and hear me okay?
Are you ready to present?
Can you see me and hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine. We can see you. Thank you.
Okay, and do I have 10 minutes?
You have 10 minutes for presentation, 15 all total.
Okay, let me know when to begin.
You're ready to start.
Okay, great. So, dear Chair, Honorable Becky Druin, and members, Public Bills Committee, thank you so much for this opportunity to address you regarding the protection of not only Nova Scotia universities, but our citizens and our economy. The river of papers and documents coming your way should include a letter from my faculty association here at Université Saint-Anne. And so I won't repeat its examples of the value of humanities to Steve Jobs, or the millions that have entered the Moncton economy through the Fry Festival after a literary prof, or the millions that Dr. Ford Doolittle brought into Nova Scotia through his research at Dow. Today, I want to bring up the example of Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Now, the geeks in the room might know who TBL is, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. The rest of you, if you don't recognize the name Sir Tim Berners-Lee, you and everyone you know use his invention every day. And that invention is the World Wide Web. So Tim Berners-Lee did not invent the internet per se. For 20 years, other computer scientists had started to build what we now think of as the internet, the World Wide Web. But when Sir Tim Berners-Lee was a computer scientist working at CERN, a research lab in Switzerland, he alone thought of an easier way to connect computers. And if you search the internet on this history of the internet, you can even see the original paper proposal that Sir Tim Berners-Lee wrote. And across the top of that paper proposal, Sir Tim Berners-Lee's supervisor, another computer science, had scrawled the response, "Vague but interesting." So one of the species-changing inventions wasn't immediately understood by other computer scientists. If your own education's included attention to paradigm shifts, you'll recognize this as a classic example of a paradigm shift, where one researcher is at such a cutting edge, literally other researchers can't really understand the power and implication of that research. That's how research works. Research does not work by having a government control what projects should and should not be researched based on the vagueness of their social and economic priorities. So when I teach a course which I created called Science and Literature, I use that example of Sir Tim Berners-Lee inventing the internet also to teach irony, because of course, a tool that was designed to share scientific knowledge has been used to share anti-scientific knowledge. And so that idea of research being vague but exciting is in fact so often at the cutting edge of research, which not all of us can always understand. So you legislators are, I fully acknowledge, much more qualified experts in passing legislation than I am. However, how many of us, or rather how few, can differentiate great quantum physics research from bad quantum physics research? Again, research needs to be led by researchers, not by bureaucrats. And then to switch from university research to super grandmaster chess, recall that in really, really, really intense super grandmaster level games of chess, past super grandmasters can't tell who's winning. Again, research is true research, pure research, species-changing research, like the Canadian University research invention of insulin. This happens at levels that are really, really hard to regulate in a really simple way. So to switch from super advanced research to health, something that impacts all our lives daily, take a guess as to what extremely common medical procedure in the United States is really taught in American medical schools. So you don't need me to remind you that in the most recent, the 2020 federal conservative leadership race, half the candidates ran on anti-abortion platforms. We know that Pierre has voted against same-sex marriage. He has voted against abortion rights. So the idea of research, university research and teaching being at the stranglehold of government is alarming on every level. And so I am disappointed by the political rhetoric that is calling Premier Houston Premier Trimp, or Premier Putin plus Houston. But again, remember, just how close some of that anti-abortion sentiment is in conservative governments elsewhere in Canada, and we don't want to see that impacting medical education and health education here in Nova Scotia. To switch to a different health issue, remember that this government has announced some interest in fracking. And so again, is research into the geological implications, the ecological implications, the health implications, the economic or social implications, for example, enriching American companies by allowing fracking here in Nova Scotia. Is that going to be allowed under Bill 12 and these radical changes to the nature of research and teaching here in Nova Scotia? And so here, some of my 10 books will fit in one hand. I have full octave hands, but I can't get all 10 books in one hand. One of these books is the groundbreaking anthology, Teaching Creative Writing in Asia. I had the great privilege of pausing my Nova Scotia professorial job, taking an unpaid leave, and teaching for 3 years in Singapore. And it was very exciting to be there. I was the inaugural director of the first creative writing master's program in the country of Singapore in the region of Southeast Asia. The degree was actually conferred by Goldsmiths, University of London. It was a really exciting time. It was international. However, ultimately, and for a while, in all honesty, I was tempted, like, do I stay here? Do I, sell the house in Nova Scotia? Do I, live in Asia for the remainder of my career? And one of the reasons I chose to come back to Nova Scotia is while Singapore was exciting to work in for a while, of course, it has a freedom of press ranking on par with Syria and Iraq. And so freedom of thought, I know not just as a scholar, but through lived experience, freedom of thought is fundamental to cutting edge research. We cannot have valuable research if it's politically hobbled. Now, that said, I fully recognize that governance of Canadian and Nova Scotia universities does need a recall. I am extremely grateful that Nova Scotia survived its threat to having an auditor general. And so I agree with the auditor general's recent report about how poorly this university spending is regulated or tracked or even observed here in Nova Scotia. So the Canadian Association of University Teachers does an excellent job tracking how regularly Canadian university administrators, including those in Nova Scotia, give themselves raises for doing the work that doesn't involve mentoring students, doesn't involve research. So to me, the glaring Nova Scotia example would be when St. Mary's University just decided to spend $500,000 on one football game. If you take a look at the CBC online, you can find an article of mine called The Professor's Paradox, back from when we at St. Anne had the longest academic university strike here in Nova Scotia. And there in that CBC article, I point out that, examples like the University of Alberta president, once making nearly $1 million. And again, that's taking public money, but rewarding the one aspect of university life, administration, that doesn't have a direct mentoring relationship with students, and it doesn't involve research. I would like to change that. Of course, we might begin to think of amalgamating some of our 11 or 12, it's frankly hard to keep track, universities here in Nova Scotia, but not to create Soviet-style political control of research and teaching. All societies need and benefit from research who empower their teaching with research. That's the beauty of university, is when research and teaching are entwined. Nova Scotia can continue to have world-leading researchers make our universities part of international migration, attracting other Canadians to Nova Scotia, as I did, or we can have puppets controlled and gagged by an autocratic government. Back to Sir Tim Berners-Lee. So again, if you don't know him as an individual, you might have seen him in the opening of the London Olympic Games, Summer Games, in which Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who invented this thing that we all use every day in ways we could never have conceived. At the opening of the London Olympics, Sir Tim Berners-Lee live tweeted a message, but also the chairs in the stadium spelled that message out with LED lights. And that message was so beautifully simple. This is for everyone, Sir Tim Berners-Lee said of his invention. That is an example of university research. That is an example of research where a researcher is empowered to pursue literally a change to the human species. That level of research happens in the minds of researchers, not via government committee. I'm so grateful for your time and attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Looking for questions. MLA Timmins.
Thank you for presenting today. Dr. Wither, is it? Wetter, sorry about that. Regarding universities and the connections to Nova Scotia, regarding the importance, do you feel that it's important that universities are helping with the impact on housing as well as healthcare professionals and the need within the province of Nova Scotia?
Recognize Dr. Wetter.
Yeah, certainly. Of course, I'm going to sound like a monster if I say no, housing's not important to research. But again, research empowers all aspects of public life. We're smarter and wiser through knowledge, and many of us regard Bill 12 here as maybe like a second major blow that the Houston government might deliver to education in Nova Scotia after that really questionable decision to no longer require teachers to have completed an undergraduate degree in addition to a BA. Education is my family trade. I'm the son of a high school teacher. My only sibling is not only also a professor, but a professor here in Nova Scotia at Acadia. My sister-in-law is a university librarian. My wife has a PhD. And so, we're always engaged in the public value of research, including with issues like the housing crisis. And remember that complex issues have solutions that come from multiple sources, not just from housing experts, but people who have made sharing of data easier, people who are law experts, people who study mental health and sociology. All these impact a really practical issue like the housing crisis.
Any further questions? Emily Wozni.
Dr. Wetter, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us today. You've spoken very passionately about the importance of academic freedom when it comes to funding research and pursuing research. Not everybody kind of has the up-close and personal sense of how research funding at times supports students to complete their studies. Through connections I have, I understand that research funding often supports graduate level and doctoral level candidates to pursue their university education, but also to complete sort of thesis work and research that's connected to that. It seems that Bill 12 obfuscates or sort of blurs the line, like as if research funding is going to have some landmark impact on the number of graduates in highly in-demand professions such as teaching and nursing. I'm wondering, from the ground level view of someone doing the work in a university setting who understands the relationship between how research funding can support graduation, how likely is it that wresting control of research priorities is actually going to have a demonstrable impact on increasing the number of teacher or nurse candidates completing undergraduate studies? Is that a false positive or a false assumption in your expert opinion?
With 50 seconds remaining, I recognize Dr.
Really
Wetter.
well-informed question. And so on the one hand, disciplines like nursing and medical research, my mom was a nurse, and so I'm a proud son of a nurse. And so those are really, really, again, practical examples of how, again, the direct opportunity to be engaged in research, either your own as a student at the upper undergraduate level or the master's or doctoral level, those examples you give, or again, that great chance of mentoring. I mean, so one of the great privileges of advanced education, of graduate education, is this almost unique opportunity to really, at times, get to pair your mind with the thought of another human. So we're all familiar with software and hardware. And
Order, please. Sorry, Dr. Wetter. We're on a tight agenda, and your time has come to an end. I have to recognize the next presenter. Thank you for coming in today. We appreciate your information today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. It's such an important bill. Thank you.
Next up, we have election in St. Pierre Faro for a 15-minute presentation.
very much for having me.
Sorry, Alexina, just 1 second. Your microphone's on until I recognize you. I recognize Alexina St. Pierre Farrell.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. I'm Alexina St. Pierre Farrell. I'm currently the chairperson of the Canadian Federation of Students Nova Scotia, and I am speaking on behalf of the students whom I represent. The Canadian Federation of Students Nova Scotia is deeply troubled by Bill 12 as introduced by Minister Maguire under Tim Houston's Progressive Conservative government. If passed, this bill will have far-reaching and destabilizing effects on the inviolability of post-secondary institutional autonomy. It would provide the Minister of Advanced Education unparalleled power and authority over appointment of university boards, edict that research is in line with government interests, and allow for the provision of unbridled authority from the Minister to impose government-mandated revitalization processes, which historically has meant cuts to services, programs, and institutional autonomy. The University Board Governance Act, as recommended in Bill 12, would have dire consequences for institutional and academic autonomy. The Act would grant the Minister authority to appoint up to half of all board members on universities' boards of governors. This Act further calls for regularization of university boards, limiting them to 30 members and applying a one-size-fits-all approach to institutional governance. While accountability on boards of governors is imperative, it does not come from mandatory appointments by impartial government powers. The introduction of the University Board of Governance Act is inherently alarming and is an example of excessive government oversight that puts academic freedom and democratic processes at risk. Bill 12 additionally limits the independent research funding and coordination body, Research Nova Scotia Corporation, requiring that their funding align with government rhetoric and priorities. Bill 12 again would provide the minister with the dangerous power over key research priorities within the province, dictating that funding fall in line with these ministerially decided interests. This is disconcerting conduct by the PC government, as their current core interests are largely corporately influenced and capital-focused. This will have far-reaching implications for both students and faculty, and the ripple effects of shifting research priorities would disproportionately impact those from marginalized communities who are at greater environmental risk. It is imperative that the government approach research directions with impartiality, allowing the experts such as scientists and researchers the autonomy to self-determine their work. In another example of ministerial overreach, Bill 12 enables the minister to withhold funding from institutions if they do not align with governmental plans. It gives the minister power to impose a revitalization plan for post-secondary institutions and allows core funding to be withheld if the university does not engage as dictated by the government. Alarmingly, this bill also provides the minister with additional power to specify who exactly an institution may consult with on such revitalization processes. Historically, when governments move in these directions with post-secondary education, it means cuts to vital programs, student services, and widely imposed austerity. Additionally, Minister Maguire, who is also the House Leader, has additionally introduced limitations on legislative debate, subsequently limiting public engagement on bills. This became effective as of February 26, 2025, and limits the amount of discussion on bills, invokes closure, and subsequently limits public engagement. This is a blatant attack on democratic processes, illustrating the indifference to the voices of stakeholders and constituents who are concerned about their futures. CFS Nova Scotia is concerned for the state of democracy, concerned for the state of post-secondary education, especially in Nova Scotia, and we are concerned about the ramifications that Bill 12 will have on faculty and students alike. To elaborate a little bit personally based on what I've seen here, students have a lack of faith in boards of governors already, and I'm concerned that this is only going to get worse when and if Bill 12 passes. Each university also has vastly different needs, and any aspect of research should be suited to the needs of each university. Bill 12 seems to be pulling us in the opposite direction. Research impacts every aspect of our lives, as our last presenter pointed out. I cannot remember their name, I apologize. Research impacts every aspect of our lives, and not only that, but research, when done poorly, impacts the most marginalized people first, and the effects of research. Students are in a unique position because they are uniquely vulnerable demographic in terms of housing, food insecurity, immigration status at times, and other factors, as students are an incredibly diverse group. In light of the interest our Nova Scotia government has taken in fracking recently, I have been especially concerned lately with how environmental research managed by interests in profit rather than interests in ecology will impact Indigenous communities who are often at the most risk when environmental damage comes in. And I'm concerned with the well-being of communities who are most at risk, including students. That's all I really have to say for right now, but I'm eager to answer questions.
Thank you. Looking for questions. Emily Wozni.
Thank you for your presentation on behalf of students. You talked about your concern, the unprecedented and unchecked ability of the minister to withhold funding to universities when they fail to align with government priorities. I certainly don't expect you to have watched 40 hours of budget estimates debate, but I had the opportunity in this chamber to ask the Minister of Advanced Education what those priorities are, where we could find them, and how they are, and by what process they are defined. And his response, in effect, was the priorities are the things that the Premier says they are, which at present are resource extraction, fracking in uranium and rare earth minerals, more healthcare faster, more teachers faster, and there's some note about green energy, but really that green energy is about getting rare earth minerals out of the ground that power batteries and make green technology feasible. So I flagged that for you because I'm hoping you might comment on, if you're a student at a university of in Nova Scotia, and your university doesn't really have any notable programs that intersect with those priorities. Your university doesn't offer nursing or a Bachelor of Education or metallurgical engineering that fast track, resource extraction. What worries do students at Nova Scotia universities that don't arguably meet these needs have about the long-term access to the programs that they're studying in? And how might that influence students' decision to attend a Nova Scotia university that doesn't have access to these kind of programs and may be forced to reallocate funding to programs that don't currently exist?
I recognize Lexington St. Pierre Farrow.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think I can speak to this both as a student representative and as a student. I currently go to NASCAD, which does not offer any of the programs you just mentioned. However, I can say that I think NASCAD students will still be affected because students are never just students. We are Indigenous people. We are people with disabilities. We represent a wide range of people who also fall into marginalized categories. As I said earlier, I am concerned with the impact that things like extractionary industry will have on Indigenous communities, and that will impact Indigenous students. I know several Indigenous students have come to me specifically with concerns about the extractionary industry having more impact on research in universities, or the potentiality for that. I think that regardless of what the impact is directly on university programs, students are still watching. Students have a unique awareness of what's going on. The students that I represent specifically, who I've spoken to, are some of the most politically active and politically engaged people that I've ever met. And so when we see pushes toward more funding for extractionary industry that has a very real, very damaging effect on the earth, all of us are keeping an eye on that. All of us are dismayed. And as for how it will impact which programs we might choose, in regards to reallocation for funding, I think some students would move into programs that are being favored by that funding, but I don't think they would do it because it's something they're very passionate about. I think a lot of them would do it because it's what may be profitable for them, and they're not necessarily in a position to not make money after they graduate. I know a lot of people who have taken degrees that they're not necessarily passionate about because it's, quite frankly, their only option to earn a living wage. And even then, it's not guaranteed.
With just under 4.5 minutes remaining, I recognize MLA Mumbercrat.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for your presentation. I just have one question for you, and it's around consultation. Of course, again, this has been a theme of many of the bills that have come to this committee, is that time and time again, stakeholders have come in, advocates from across the province, and have indicated when they've tried to reach out to government, they have had no response. So you represent the Canadian Federation. We were actually members of the Canadian Federation way back when I was in student government at CBU. But my question to you is, as an organization yourself, but as an organization, did you have the opportunity, did you reach out to the minister's office for a conversation? Did you have the opportunity to have a conversation about some of the concerns that you're bringing forward today?
I recognize Alexina St. Pierre Farrell.
Thank you so much for that, and I appreciate that you were involved in CBU. The CBU Student Union has some of the greatest student organizers that I've had the privilege to work with. This is actually the first time I've personally had the opportunity to speak directly to people involved in government, although we have been very public about our stance on Bill 12. I think that a big issue with the lack of student representation generally that I'm seeing is that this bill will directly impact student boards of governors that are supposed to represent students at universities, along with other interests, the interests of faculty, etc. There's already, as I mentioned, quite little faith that students already have in these boards of governors. I think that Bill 12, if allowed to pass, will not necessarily be creating a bad situation, but rather making a bad situation worse in this case. Even though we do have students serving on most boards of governors, based on what I've been told, these voices are not always made to feel heard. And quite frankly, students make up such a small portion of boards of governors constituencies that I have trouble believing that there really is a lot of meaningful consultation with students. I think students are one of the largest, most vibrant, most full of potential groups of people and demographic in this province, and yet we are consulted so little. When we are consulted, it's usually in an individual capacity rather than our capacity of students as a whole. And that is quite concerning to me, which is why I'm here today.
Thank you. We have 1 minute, 30 seconds remaining. Seeing no other questions from anyone else, I can return to MLA Wozni for a second question. MLA Wozni.
Thank you for your comments about representation on current representation on University Board of Governors. I think one of the concerns we're hearing from lots of Nova Scotians is this government ran on a certain platform, and yet here in this first session, where there's a bit of a bait and switch, right? A mandate to improve healthcare, affordability, affordable housing, has become a mandate to use tariffs to achieve a number of things that they did not seek a public mandate for. On this bill, the ability of the minister to stack university boards up to 50% of each university board with people that they appoint from the public service, completely outside of the governor and council process where people apply and are vetted. You've just raised your concerns about student representation. One of the things we've heard in this legislation, or the rationale is, well, students deserve to be represented. We understand your concerns about the way that they are currently represented. How does it make you feel that student representation is being leveraged by this government to justify such sweeping changes to board governance when the legislation doesn't do anything demonstrable to address the concerns you've already raised about student representation?
Sorry, Alexina. Your time's up. MLA Wozni speaks too much. Thank you for coming in. We do appreciate it. We're on a tight schedule, so I'm going to Ziggy Kirch for a 15-minute presentation. I recognize Ziggy Kirch. Ziggy Kirch.
Yeah. Thank you all for having me. Good morning. My name is Ziggy Kirch. I am the Vice President Academic of the Student Union of NASCAD University. Bill 12 poses a clear and serious threat to post-secondary education, particularly for the humanities and arts. As a union representative and a concerned fine arts student, I am here today to voice the students' opposition to this bill. It is not the place of the minister to control universities unilaterally. Bill 12 would grant the minister the authority to withhold critical operational and research funds, as well as appoint and restrict university boards. The consolidation of powers into the minister's hands is a violation of academic freedom, with the clear goal of aligning the education and research administered by universities with partisan interests. I must stress the impact that such changes have on the people of Nova Scotia. By degrading the quality of post-secondary education, you limit an entire generation. The purpose of higher education is not merely to provide skilled labor. It is in these places where critical thinking, analysis, and the sharing of knowledge drives economic, intellectual, and cultural progress in ways critical for securing a decent future for the citizens of Nova Scotia in a fast-paced and competitive national and global marketplace. As a fine arts student myself and a union representative for the students of an art and design university, I am intimately aware of the simultaneous importance of this education, as well as its devaluation by corporate and conservative interests. A top-down approach to the administration and governance of educational institutions has historically failed to meet the material interests of students. At NASCAD University, students have been fighting for more agency and control within the institutions they go into massive debt to attend. We are very aware of the ways in which NASCAD University structurally differs from other universities in Chipuktuk, with its emphasis on studio-based courses. We are already struggling against a board of governors with little to no on-the-ground experience of attending such an institution. The proposed University Board Governance Act is sure to exacerbate this divide between governance and students. It is our belief that universities should be and would be better served by boards built of students and faculty, not out-of-touch bureaucrats with little to no experience of the institution they are governing. Bill 12 presents a serious threat to the future of universities such as NASCAD. If the minister were to decide that an institution like NASCAD, the oldest art college in so-called Canada, does not align with its priorities, there is a distinct possibility that the minister could cut off funding, ceasing the university's operations indefinitely. Decisions of this sort would end the existence of a critical piece of local and international history, leaving no other art colleges in the province. It should be of concern that the minister would be granted the unchecked power to withhold funding to any university that does not align itself with the government's economic and social priorities. An attack on education is an attack on the future of this province, the prospects, outcomes, and opportunities of this generation and all that follow. Every person with a stake in our shared future, young and old, should oppose Bill 12. That's all I have.
We're open for questions. MLA Wozni.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ziggy, for your presentation and your candor about your concerns with Bill 12. One of the struggles as the official opposition in this session has been, the fact that government has sort of just dropped these bills without any kind of advance notice. We didn't really know what the legislative agenda was going to be. We learned about these bills at the moment that they were introduced in the House, and so there's a lot of hustle to kind of figure out how was this developed, where did it come from, and as we go. When we ask for questions about what motivates this, where does this come from, there's been some buzzwords that we've heard over and over again from this government on this bill, things like standardization, efficiency, and a focus on best practices. But the government has never clarified where it's getting its definition of best practices from. You've commented very knowledgeably and passionately about NASCAD as a unique institution in the landscape of Nova Scotia universities. In your view, what best practices around board governance should the government be considering rather than enforcing a one-size-fits-all on all universities in Nova Scotia when it comes to governance?
I recognize Ziggy Kirch.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I sit on the Academic Senate of NASCAD, and I'm a part of a union that has 2 seats on the Board of Governors. But that is 2 seats of a much larger board. And the majority of the seats on the Board of Governors currently at NASCAD is just random people, kind of like it's lawyers and dentists and people who have never attended an arts institution, people with very little experience of NASCAD as a whole. And so what we have been pushing for has been increased student and faculty representation on our board. And this bill would not achieve that. It would only exacerbate this problem by not selecting people who are actually attending the institution, part of the institution that they're supposed to be governing. And I do not see how you can be effective in your administration and governance of an institution if you have no knowledge of it.
Any further questions before I return to Emily Wozni? Emily Wozni.
Thank you for your response to that question. The Auditor General, in her report on university funding, recognizes that the operating grants, granted to Nova Scotia University varies, but on average, the operating grants account for about 30% of the funding of each university. A huge chunk of the operating funds of universities come from tuition paid by students. This legislation proposes to award the government 50% of representation on university boards for only 30% of funding. In your view, where students offer as much as that 30% funding, how much representation should students have on boards of governors, given that their tuition makes up such a broad base of the funding that universities have to operate?
I recognize Ziggy Kirch.
Well, again, I am a student, so it is my interest that students have a far larger representation. I mean, if this was like a company, students are like one of the main stakeholders in the company that would be NASCAD University. And this does not even recognize the important role that faculty play in terms of what they offer to the institution and the insight they have into how an institution would be best run. And so I think that, any amount that is greater than the current amount of student representation would be far ideal. That said, you said 30%. I'll take 30%. But yeah, I think that's my answer to that question.
I recognize MLA Timmons.
Thank you. Do you mind if I call you Ziggy?
No, I don't.
Regarding the changes that we're looking at within the bill itself, does this, you did express the concern about the faculty and the board not having enough representation and knowledge and experience in the university itself or in NASCAD. My daughter's in the arts as well, and I really appreciate the work that's being done in that school as well. Does this, do you feel that this will open up some more opportunities for students to be represented on committees?
I recognize Ziggy Kirch.
No, I do not feel that. This bill, from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, says that one student and one faculty member plus however many government-appointed board members. We currently have 2 students on our Board of Governors. So this does nothing to materially increase our representation on the board. And so, yeah, no, I don't think that this would be useful.
Do I have any other MLA's question before I go back to Emily Timmons? Emily Timmons for a follow-up.
Do you feel it would improve the experience on the board as it exists right now?
I recognize Ziggy Kirch.
No, I don't.
Any further questions? Well, thank you for your presentation. We appreciate you coming in. Next, we're going back to Bill number 6, Agriculture, Energy, and Natural Resources, an act respecting. And the speaker is a 10-minute presentation for Marney Reynolds. Well, you have 5 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for questioning. I recognize Marney Reynolds.
Thank you. I'm going to read this because I do like to speak, and I'm trying to condense things as quickly as possible into the 5 minutes. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. I am Marney Reynolds. To be transparent about any possible special interest group I might be part of, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a mother, a grandmother, a senior citizen, a retired social worker and special education teacher, an environmental advocate, a settler, an ally. I love art, playing the ukulele, and I do look at Facebook sometimes. So that's as much as I think you need to know about me. But I'm not here to talk about myself or to give you information about why bans on fracking and uranium exploration were made in Nova Scotia, because you already have that information, and I only have 5 minutes. I'm not here to discuss why I believe that there is a need for provincial policy to protect coastline, because we all know there's lots of information about that too if people choose to read it. What I am here to talk about today is something that has been a big part of my job as a social worker, a teacher, and a parent, specifically the importance of exploring patterns of behavior. What are patterns of behavior and why is it important to examine them? Basically, they're actions that we repeatedly take to get the result we want. So if you want a cookie and asking for it doesn't work, you can change your behavior to get that cookie. My favorite as a child was to get my younger sister to steal it and then take it from her. So I changed my behavior to get what I wanted. We all change our actions to get what we want. So why is it important to study patterns of behavior? It's important because your past patterns of behavior help to predict your future patterns of behavior. I am not a criminal, though I have to say I gave up stealing, getting my sister to steal for me. If we look at the behaviors of our current Premier, Tim Houston, we can see a disturbing disregard for science, human health, and environmental protection. To look at the Coastal Protection Act, for instance, we see that Tim Houston was not upfront about his decision to kill the act during the first election, but instead used words like consultation and the need to educate coastal landowners. We now see a repeat of this pattern of killing environmental protection measures by attempting to lift the ban on fracking and uranium exploration. But now, Tim Houston is very minimally using the words consultation or education. He didn't even mention his intent to do this during the recent election. This, to me, demonstrates an escalating pattern of disrespect, destructive and deceptive behavior on Tim Houston's part. He is doing whatever he wants to do without even mentioning to Nova Scotians first. So what do we as private citizens do about a government that is behaving badly? 3 steps to change bad behavior, and I used them a lot when I was working with children and families. That was primarily my career. First of all, you look at what's triggering the bad behavior, or what does he want? Is it more money? More control, more power? Does he have a beef with science and in the environment? Don't know. Does he want to impress his new BFF, Doug Ford? Who knows? I think that's one of the things. 2, what do? You disrupt the pattern of behavior. You put a wrench in it by protesting, letter writing, engaging media, calling your MLAs to drive them crazy so they finally talk to their boss about it, etc. We're doing that. 3, you demonstrate how to replace the bad behavior. So we model appropriate behaviors by being honest, respectful, caring, and action-oriented, and demanding that our elected leaders do the same. 4, you keep it simple. We simply ask that Tim Houston bring the fracking ban issue to Nova Scotians for a vote. Do you support the lifting of the ban on fracking and uranium exploration? Yes or no? Simple. 5, you think long term. As a grandmother and a mother, I think long term about my daughter and her family and how I want my 6-month-old granddaughter and my 7-year-old grandson to live in a healthy environment with clean water that is not being polluted by tailing ponds, and for them to be able to breathe clean air, not radon air that is released from mining. The last and final step is you persist and resist. That's what we're doing now. I'm 70 years old, and as long as I can walk and speak in a half-intelligible manner, I will continue to persist and resist as I feel it is necessary. This is how a democracy is supposed to operate. Let's keep resisting and persisting until it does. Thank you.
Floor is open for questions. We have no questions. Would you like to take a couple minutes to conclude your remarks? Oh, sorry. I recognize Marney Reynolds.
Thank you. That's me.
You have 4 minutes remaining, Ms. Reynolds.
I have 4 minutes. Okay. Basically, in my work as a social worker and a therapist, primarily as a therapist and a special ed teacher, I have worked with a lot of disadvantaged people. I've worked with a lot of people who need supports and caring. And I recognize, because we are on unceded Mi'kmaq territory, that we need to be respectful of that. And on Facebook, I don't know if many of you saw, there was an elder who actually spoke at the mining conference in Toronto that said this was something that they were not even consulted about. She said the Indigenous Mi'kmaq people have not ceded the territory. All they have is water and land as their wealth, and they need to talk to the Mi'kmaq people, and I say the rest of Nova Scotians, before you make this kind of destructive decision, because it's a pattern of behavior that he has. It's not a one-off, and I'm afraid if we don't stop him now, what his next step might be will be even more arrogant. And that's all I have to say. I'm not a fan of Tim Houston, as you can tell.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Oh, Emily Wozni.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds, for your testimony here today. I hear in your comments a deep concern about the unilateral revocation of bans on fracking, uranium extraction, and other precious mineral extraction. In your mind, is there a path towards changes in resource extraction in Nova Scotia if the government were to undertake deep, meaningful consultation with a broad spectrum of stakeholders that established a publicly supported mandate to pursue such an agenda?
I recognize Ms. Reynolds.
Sorry, I'm not used to having to wait to speak, sorry. I think that in a global climate crisis, which we are in, or emergency, however you want to say it, we need to lean less towards traditional fossil fuels and more towards green technology, such as solar and wind power. I think we also need to adjust our expectations on how we live our lives. We are gluttonous in terms of water use and electricity. We need to look at alternatives that actually will help move our world, and Nova Scotia in particular, because we're extremely vulnerable as a little tiny province in the middle of the ocean. So yes, I believe that there are many people who know how to do it. I'm not an expert because I'm a social worker. But I would love to hear someone who truly has good intentions to make this more green and sustainable without increasing the damage to our province and our planet.
Recognize Emily Mumbercat.
Thank you, and I apologize for coming in late to your presentation, but I bet I did. But I just wanted to say something as someone who used to be responsible for the mineral side of exploration in the province as a former mining minister. Your point is not lost on me on the absolute it's ridiculous to me that there was no consultation done. We would have a relationship in the past where when we would look at projects, we would work with Mi'kmaq leaders. We would look at what was best for the land in economic development, if there was an opportunity there, whether it was a mineral extraction or if we were looking at any potential major development. It was all in collaboration with one another. We looked at traditional hunting grounds. We looked at all of the things that were necessary so that as we go down the path of resource development, and we've seen success in the province when it comes to various lining up. Oh.
Order, please. Sorry, Ms. Reynolds, your time has come to an end. We will return to this bill again later. Right now, we're going to move to Bill number 1, Government Organization Administration and Act Respecting. Presenter is Alex Marland for a 10-minute presentation. Welcome, Alex. I recognize Alex Marland.
Hi there. Thanks for the opportunity to come in. For those who don't know me, I'm a political science professor at Acadia. I hold the job title of Jaroslawski Chair in Trust and political leadership. I just want to stress that I'm here as an individual. I haven't talked to anybody about coming in here other than my wife, and I hadn't told her, I'd be in a lot of trouble. So I'm really just here on my own. Yeah, she's not. I told her it was online. She said, I'm not watching that. But I do know that there are people watching online, and I do know that there are people who care about this. I just have one specific narrow thing to bring to people's attention about Bill 1, and it's specifically Clause 2 or 15, Section 2. So I'm just going to read out what I've prepared here, and then I'm happy to answer any questions in the time available. So I'd like to draw attention to why the proposal to provide a stipend for ministerial assistance in Bill 1 should, in my opinion, be amended. As proposed, Clause 15 would enshrine in law that, quote, there shall be paid to every ministerial assistant in addition to the accounts to which the ministerial assistant is entitled under the House of Assembly Act on an annual salary in the amount determined pursuant to Section 45A of that Act. So for me, we need to keep in mind a principle underpinning parliamentary democracy in Nova Scotia. Our system is built on the principle that the executive branch must be accountable to the legislative branch. To govern, appointed members of the executive must maintain the confidence of a majority of elected members of the legislature. MLAs must be able to represent their constituents and advocate on their behalf. All non-cabinet members must be able to hold the executive accountable for its proposals and decisions. MLAs, in my opinion, must push back against bills that, if passed, would limit further their independence from the executive branch. So to me, there's a risk to this principle in this particular clause. While not part of cabinet, ministerial assistants are assigned to support a designated cabinet minister. Ministerial assistants are expected to be loyal to the executive branch because they need to carry out duties on behalf of a minister, such as fielding questions about government, attending public events, granting media interviews, and in theory, acting as a liaison with backbenchers. Since they represent the minister, ministerial assistants effectively represent the cabinet, and thus they represent the executive. Although they are MLAs with one foot in each branch of government, they tend to behave as though they are part of the executive. Clause 15.2 of Bill 1 would see all ministerial assistants receive remuneration. In the governing party's caucus, there are currently 21 members of cabinet. One serves as the speaker, and the remaining 21 MLAs are ministerial assistants. In my view, granting title without remuneration is symbolic. But doing so with remuneration constitutes a contractual arrangement to be loyal to the executive. Clause 15.2 of Bill 1 is a case of executive creep, namely the encroachment of the executive over the legislative branch, something that has been happening across the country. Allowing Clause 15.2 to proceed as worded would aggrandize the power of the Premier's office and undermine the principle of responsible government, and I contend democracy itself. So here's my recommendation. I believe that ministerial assistants warrant additional remuneration. This is a broadly accepted principle for extra duties. To mitigate the risk to representative democracy, I recommend that Clause 15.2 be amended to include the following, quote, the maximum number of ministerial assistants shall be less than the number of cabinet members, end quote. So in the immediate term, if adopted, this amendment would require the current government to streamline the number of MLAs appointed to these roles. But in the long term, the amendment would guarantee that all governing party caucuses have a subset of MLAs who serve as more arm's-length members, who help to maintain a healthier level of autonomy within the governing party's caucus, and who possess a greater ability to advocate for the people who elected them. Thank you for the opportunity to share my opinion.
Looking for, recognize MLA Wozni.
Thank you, Dr. Marland, for your presentation here today and for bringing this concern forward. It may or may not surprise you that at present the role of ministerial assistant is undefined in Nova Scotia. There is no discrete description of their function or their relationship to the executive branch. I appreciate your your suggested amendment, but even if your amendment were sort of enacted by this current government, it would leave a stark minority of members within the supermajority caucus that, at least on paper, have some distance from the executive branch to function in this somewhat independent, way that you've outlined in your presentation. I'm wondering if you could sort of further elaborate on the danger of a supermajority. I mean, it helps us to think about what these changes would look like if they were enacted under sort of current circumstances, which are fairly exceptional. A 43-member supermajority, something that the current government is happy to cheer itself on about. What risks are there to adopting even the amendments that are here, such that you would have a very small number of MLAs in the current supermajority caucus able, even in a nominal way, push back internally against legislation that they may have concerns about?
I recognize Dr. Marland.
Thanks for the question. So generally, I think it's important to remember that the Premier has the prerogative to make recommendations about how many cabinet ministers there should be, and equally has the prerogative in this case to determine how many ministerial assistants there should be. It's not unusual for these positions not to be defined. I worked in the government of Newfoundland and Labrador many years ago, and I had to sit down with the parliamentary secretary to explain what the role was because he was totally befuddled. He had no idea. This is not unusual. The main thing for me is simply the principle that if you have so many people who are receiving extra money from the government, you are creating a contractual arrangement where there is loyalty to the government. And in a parliamentary democracy, it is essential that people have freedom to represent their constituents and not have that extra level. You can quite imagine a circumstance, and this happens all the time, where somebody says, listen, if you want to stay in the role, you need to do these things. So I'm simply saying that there should just, I'm not making a judgment on what the Premier's decision is about how many people there are. I could go either way on that. The main thing is the principle should be there should be some MLAs in the governing party, regardless of which party that is, who are not receiving extra money from the government and the executive branch itself.
Any further questions? I recognize MLA Outhouse.
Thank you for being here. And I did take political science many years ago, but at Dalhousie. So, and so we keep hearing talk about this mega majority as if it was something that the Premier did, or something that the party did, or something that we did. The people chose to give us a mega majority through an open and fair election. So we don't respect the will of the people and who they voted for? I don't understand that argument. But anyway, it is what it is. We didn't expect it. I never expected it. I spent 16 years in municipal government, known as a bit of a rebel at times, occasionally voting against budgets, occasionally not agreeing with others. I guess what and I won't say offend me, because this isn't personal, because I think you're here honestly and with good intentions to try and stand up for democracy, but to think for a tiny stipend that I would not continue to express my concerns to the Premier or the concerns of my district, my constituency, to a cabinet minister or to the Premier, and we have very open and free-flowing caucus meetings. This is all new to me. I've only been involved with this for a few months. But to say that because I get a stipend that suddenly I forsake the feelings and desires of my own morals, my own experience, my own endeavors, and those of the people I represent, this is a little strange to me, and I just, maybe that's not how it's intended, but it comes off that basically I can be bought for a tiny and silenced for a tiny stipend.
Order, please. This wraps up your time. Sorry, Dr. Marland. Thank you for coming in, though. I appreciate your information. This concludes presenters for this bill. I'm asking for a motion from the floor to report this bill back to the House. Recognize Emily Wozni.
Chair, there's been a significant volume of presenters expressing concern about this bill and its contents. We believe that the proposals contained in this bill are important and deserve better and more consideration. I move that this bill not be referred back to the House and instead be returned to the sponsoring minister and their department for further analysis and development, including broad-based, respectful public engagement and expert analysis.
You heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those against, opposed, signify by saying nay. The chair votes nay.
I'd like to call a recorded vote on the motion.
I'm looking at MLA Venixon for motion now.
Yes, your motion.
Oh, my motion. I move that Bill number 1, an act respecting government organization and administration, be reported back to the House.
You heard the motion, and there's a call for recorded vote.
So you can all name my name.
In voting, a recorded vote, sorry. So signify by saying sorry. MLA Timmins.
Can I just have a clarification? We are setting a motion on this,
The motion, as
a vote on this motion.
yes, the motion is to return the bill back to the House.
Aye.
So, MLA Timmins.
Yes.
MLA Venixon.
Yes.
MLA McGowan.
Yes.
MLA Outhit.
Yes.
MLA Mumbercrat.
No.
MLA Rankin.
No.
MLA Hammond.
No.
MLA Wozni.
No.
The chair votes yes. Motion is approved. We now go back to Bill number 68, the Financial Measures Act. We have one presenter that's virtual for 15 minutes, Harry Stackhouse. I recognize Harry Stackhouse. Harry, can we get you to turn on your camera, please?
How's that?
There you are. Thank you very much. You can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today about this proposed tax. I'm a Nova Scotia resident residing in Pictou County, and I think part of the dialogue missing these days is the importance of our elected officials kind of reflecting on their past statements. So I'd like to break my discussion into two areas, and each prefaced with a personal quote from Premier Houston. These quotes, I hope, will illustrate how well-intended and well-received statements can later be contradicted by their follow-up actions. And to be honest, the statements, both statements that the Premier made that I'm going to share with you, gave me hope at the time I heard of them. And the two areas are one, home affordability, finding another tool, and two, returning to free trade while keeping Nova Scotia safe and whole. So here's what the Premier said on home affordability and finding another tool. May 2022, I quote, "My intention all along, and the intentions of our government all along, were to improve home affordability. That was never meant to be at odds with our core value, the core value of our government, the core value of our province, which is being more welcoming. So today I'll put my personal pride to the side. This policy was an effort to find a solution. It was always meant to be a tool to support housing. But when you realize that the tool in your hand might not get the job done, you look for another tool. And so I commit to finding a tool to make home affordable for all Nova Scotians, especially first-time buyers," end quote. So this was during an announcement that he had to cancel the taxing of non-resident property owners and buyers, as well as his commitment to seek out new tools to make affordable homes a reality for Nova Scotia. So after considerable research, I have found zero evidence that this tool, a new transfer tax, will make housing more affordable. In fact, in your own 2023 Nova Scotia Housing Needs Assessment Report, it summarizes the opposite, that there is a housing supply shortage across the housing spectrum, that the current pace of construction must be increased to realize demand, that there is a lack of affordable options, that a rapidly growing population is driving the housing situation, and that we need a balance of housing types and sizes moving forward, that population demographics are changing, and so are housing needs. And this tax will not address any of the above needs. So I can only conclude that the Premier hasn't found a new tool, he's just using an old one again. And the fact that this doubling of the tax, as I understand it, has not even been discussed with caucus and certainly hasn't been communicated to the broader public, tells me that the old tool is just a convenient way of generating revenues. So next, let me share you with a very recent statement that was made by our Premier on the topic of returning to free trade and keeping Nova Scotians whole. As of recent as May 5th of this year, and I quote, "Our country must return to free trade within our country. It seems remarkable that we have to say it, but it needs to be said, so I will say it. We need free trade within Canada. We will do everything in our power to keep Nova Scotians safe and to keep them whole," end quote. So not only did the Premier speak on the need of returning to free trade, he actually proposed a bill himself intended for all the other premiers. Free trade and mobility within Canada, that he would be taking a leadership role in implementing. A bill that, ironically, I saw on the agenda yesterday and today. I'm not sure if it's been covered, but I know it's on your agenda. Yet this proposed tax effectively acts as a tariff on fellow Canadians, erecting the very kind of economic barrier that he is working to dismantle. The contradiction risks undermining the credibility of Nova Scotia on the national stage and weakening Nova Scotia's position as a leader in economic openness. Championing free trade across Canada while imposing restrictions on other provinces in your own backyard? Nova Scotia's approach is unprecedented in modern Canadian policy. And I might add, the only province to do so in the country. And it doesn't take much research to find out that it isn't the only jurisdiction. It's the only jurisdiction in the world to do so. I know that sounds absurd, but one has to wonder why Nova Scotia thinks this is such a good idea. And lastly, on why Nova Scotians won't be left whole by this tax or tariff. Let's be realistic. This is not a resident buyer's tax. It's a Nova Scotia seller's tax. Giving Nova Scotians a leg up will be at the expense of other Nova Scotians. Essentially, a transfer of wealth from Nova Scotia property owners will go directly to the provincial treasury. This tax doesn't penalize non-residents. It directly impacts Nova Scotians, especially those who see their homes as a key part of their retirement plan. Many longtime residents depend on selling their property at fair market value to fund their futures. Imagine being told by your own government that if you want to sell your home to someone else in your own country, you have to do it at an unfair market value. By artificially limiting the pool of buyers, the government is lowering home values, reducing demand, and making it harder for Nova Scotians to retire comfortably. So my apologies, but we won't be kept whole. So please, I ask you to reflect on your previous statements, remove barriers, don't build them. In these uncertain times, this is not the time to be adding taxes or tariffs. There's still time to do the right thing. With that, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking for questions. MLA Vanningson.
Thank you, Chair. And may I call you Harry, or is it Mr. Stackhouse?
Harry is good. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation, Harry. Towards the beginning of your presentation, you made a comment that this was not discussed with caucus. Can I ask how you came to that information?
I recognize, excuse me, sorry. I have to recognize you for it to be recorded. I recognize Harry Stackhouse.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. So I had a conversation with a few other people, but perhaps I can ask you if it was actually, turn that question back to you and ask you if it was talked to caucus. I have it in good faith that it wasn't, but maybe I was wrong.
Further questions? I recognize MLA Lumbercraft.
Thank you, Mr. Stackhouse. Thanks for coming before committee. As a caucus, we completely agree that the tax is unnecessary. We heard from the Real Estate Association last night that said this will be a big detriment to their industry. We're still trying to ascertain why the government feels that this is necessary now to put this tax in place, especially seeing that, I use the example of if they're looking for revenue, they probably should have left the tolls on the bridges in Halifax and not put $300 million immediately on the deficit of the province by making that decision. So more of a comment than a question at this point, because we're both on the same page. We fundamentally agree that this is actually going to hurt Nova Scotians more in the long run to have this tax, and I appreciate you coming before the committee today.
I recognize Harry Stackhouse.
Thanks very much. And maybe just because I have a bit more time, I'll just talk about the fact that that this really is the only tax of its kind in Canada. And I just did a bit of research to find out whether or not things like this exist in other parts of Canada. And the only two I could find was BC and Ontario, which have tax on foreigners from outside the country. PEI has a tax that goes across, applies equally to all buyers, regardless of residency, and it's 1% of the greater of the purchase price or assessed value. No additional tax or surcharges specifically on non-residents. And they have exemptions that apply for qualifying first-time homebuyers. So to me, that seems like a more realistic way of trying to approach giving a leg up to other Nova Scotians. But I found out that because we're the only jurisdiction, not only in Canada, but also around the world, I just use tools that are available to us right now through AI to do a real-time scan of legal and tax information around the globe. And I did it several times to make sure I was accurate. And we are the only jurisdiction in the world that actually has put this in. So I'm struggling with the fact that you think this is a good idea. And I will go back to the fact that the Premier himself said he would look for a new tool. This is not a new tool. This is the same one he used before, and all he's doing is increasing it. And for what? For $12 million a year, 0.07%. So I met with an MLA locally, was told that this is not a revenue grab, but he struggled with being able to give me the real reasons and what this was going to do for giving the leg up to Nova Scotians. but I really do feel that this is going to be at the expense of other Nova Scotians. Because of not being able to sell your house at fair value, market fair value, just seems ludicrous to me that we would subject Nova Scotians to that end. So, thank you.
I recognize MLA Wozni.
Mr. Stackhouse, thanks for your presentation today, and I want to commend you for your thoughtful approach to your concerns, particularly that you looked at the intent of the original measure, that this was in effect an experiment to see whether or not this tool could promote a greater supply of housing at a time that it was in short supply. And you've took that at face value and have kind of evaluated on that basis. You've already provided some facts to suggest that this tool has not had the desired impact. It has not demonstrably increased the supply of affordable housing to Nova Scotians. What's your sense of what doubling this tax will have on the supply of affordable housing for Nova Scotians? You've already commented that it will penalize Nova Scotia homeowners trying to sell their homes. How do you see this doubling of this tax impacting the supply of affordable housing for Nova Scotians that want to have housing in the form of homes that they own?
With just under 3 minutes remaining, I recognize Mr. Stackhouse.
Thank you. I struggle to find how this is going to have any material impact on affordable housing. For one, it's going to affect the rural areas of Nova Scotia, and not near the bigger centers where people have jobs to work, where there's better transportation systems in place. And let's be honest, these homes have been built for people who find an affinity to the province, build their dream homes, maybe their shoreline properties. And so I just can't see how this will affect positively the affordable housing. And the reason I say that is because, as I mentioned before, I went back and I looked at the document that was created. And there's nothing in there that says a tax will be the one that's going to save the affordable housing. And let's look at it. It's $12 million. That's nothing for the government, but it's considerable for those that are using their homes as a retirement vehicle and being penalized because you're selling to somebody else in Canada. Just seems ludicrous that a government would step in and say you can't get your home at an affordable or at a fair market value. You need to sell it below that. We're going to penalize you for that. It just seems ridiculous.
Any further questions? Seeing no further questions, Mr. Stackhouse, you have 1 minute remaining if you want to give us some closing remarks.
Yeah, I mean, my closing remark would be why in this time, when there is so much uncertainty, why would we affect local Nova Scotians and put an increased level of risk on the Nova Scotians? Why say that we're going to help one group by hurting another group? This doesn't make any sense to me. And I was told by my local MLA that Premier Houston will do what's right for Nova Scotians. Well, this isn't right for all Nova Scotians. And this won't help the Nova Scotians that are struggling with bigger problems. You need to boost your supply, you need to housing supply, you need to streamline your development approvals, you need to invest in infrastructure, you need to offer incentives for building affordable, not taxing. You need to maybe target speculation and vacancy. Number of homes that are owned by Nova Scotians, multiply. There's all sorts of economic consequences that are going to be felt by Nova Scotians. Lower property values, loss of revenue for local businesses, contractors, service providers, potential long-term damage to Nova Scotia's reputation at a time when we're divided, at a time when our Premier is standing up and saying that he's the one that's going to lead the charge on making
Order, please. Sorry, Mr. Stackhouse, your time has come to an end. We thank you for presenting today. Our next presenter is Chris Arant. I think it's pronounced your last name correctly. Chris, you can correct me when you sit down, please. And
can I just give out these?
The pages, we'll pass them out. And we have a 15-minute presentation, folks. I recognize Christopher Arant.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in front of you all. This is the first time I'm involved in the province or in general in my life in any political conversation. So guide me a little bit around all the processes here and feel free to mention, well, stay in line here with any recognizing anything. I'm here today to speak on behalf of Chester Builders, as I mentioned, and as I believe, I also speak on behalf of every small business owner in Nova Scotia, obviously regarding the provincial deed transfer tax. Who is Chester Builders? Chester Builders is a custom home builder based in Chester on the South Shore. We are building and developing land in that area. We're building custom homes right when you come to me and say, I would like to build something, I have a piece of land here, I don't, and I will help you start from scratch, build it, develop the land. And we are also involved in land development on a small scale on the South Shore with 2 oceanfront developments there. That is my background. I am co-founder and partner of Chester Builders, and I'm referring to the deed transfer tax increase, especially when I look at who are our clients, who are the clients that are affecting me, but not only me, but also the area that I'm serving and building in. When I think about our clients, I think about Nova Scotia first, because I choose to be in Nova Scotia. I came here 7 years ago, and I think it's the most beautiful place in the world. When I came here, I was told I should go further west. There is where's all the money, there's where all the glory is, all the jobs, and there's nothing to get in Nova Scotia. My heart felt different, and this is why I'm here, and this is how everything unfolded, and I have the pleasure now to live here and to enjoy the beautiful lifestyle and meet great people here. And I can see this kind of energy and positivity, not just in myself, but also in the people that I talk to. There are plenty of people coming from outside the province, even from outside the country, to Nova Scotia, and they have that same attitude. They have the same feeling about this province. There is a certain kind of energy here. When I came before COVID, the bad C word, I was in Halifax, and I loved Halifax already. Now when I go to Halifax, and you all know how the waterfront developed, how we had Sail GP here last year. There's huge things happening. When you go down the South Shore, the development and the new properties that are coming, the new people that are coming in. And I talk to people that, which is important to know, and they are my clients. I talk to people that are coming to me from within Nova Scotia. They're coming mostly from Halifax because they want to come to the South Shore. They like the busy city life, but they like to have also the more relaxation, the more calm and South Shore lifestyle on the coast. I have also people that are coming to me that are born in Nova Scotia, and they want to come back to Nova Scotia. They live right now in Alberta and Ontario, British Columbia, and all the other provinces, and say, we would like to come back because we miss it. It's just a special place. I can attest to that. We also have people that are coming to us that are from down south and say, we like Nova Scotia for a seasonal home. It's too hot in the very south in Florida. We would like to have a little place here on the beautiful South Shore. And as my origin is as well, there are lots of Germans, and I can't blame them that are interested, as well as other Europeans like British people that come over and say, this is the place to be. Peaceful, quiet, great people, and as I just alluded to, just a wonderful lifestyle. So all these people are interested in what I'm interested already. And with that in mind, I will go through a few points where I think the deed transfer tax has a negative impact on. Number one, you have the chance to be deed transfer tax exempt if you claim your primary residency within the first 6 months. That is a start, I would say, but it's not enough for people that want to move here, especially, let's say, people that are born here and come back, because if they find a piece of land and they have all that, then I come in and I start developing the piece of land with them. that is a bit of a process. We have to find out together how long does it, where do you want your house, where do you want your septic field, where do you want the well, get all this situated. That's a big decision. If people say they want to retire here or get a second career, they are busy and they have to also focus on this important part. That takes around 2 to 3 months. Then after laying out the land, we're drawing the plans. The construction plans, as you might understand, there's a lot of detail that goes into it. So that can take between 1, 3, sometimes 6, 8 months. And we're going through these procedures as clearing the land, selecting and quoting the items that these people want, and then building the house. Before asking for a building permit. Building permits take, depending on where you are, between 1 and 3 months' time. So if you add all this up, I don't want to bore you with all these numbers, but just to give you a general idea on a positive side, this process from buying the piece of land and then living in their house can take 18 months, maybe even longer. So I don't see how people that choose to have Nova Scotia again or as their primary residency have a chance to fall within these 6 months and are de-transfer tax exempt. My previous presenter before me here mentioned an interesting point and said, can it help low-income housing to raise this provincial de-transfer tax? I'm wondering, are these people that are coming here to Nova Scotia and building a new home or buying a house after they had a certain lifetime already in other provinces and build a career and build a life, are they competing with people that are looking at the low-income housing? Are they looking at a $300,000 or $400,000 house like I did when I came here? My argument is no, because everyone that I talk to is looking for a new build most of the time. And if they buy a new house, it's a substantial renovation, and it's always around $800,000 and upwards, up to it in the millions. So there's no competition with any, let's say, average housing. That is the big debate here. So there's no, there's no competition there. Also keeping in mind, when there is people that are building these houses, that are owning these houses, and I can speak to Chester and the surrounding area there, they all need help. Let's say the scenario that they are not living here full-time, but they live here part-time in a seasonal home, and they're only here 4 or 5 months a year. Somebody has to look after the property. The property needs to be maintained. There needs to be septic services. There needs to be lawn mowing services. So the whole package of how do you care for the home. These are usually local businesses that take care of these homes. Again, we just said they're not competing with any of the low-income housing, yet they contribute to the economy, to the locals, by providing them a business model to basically make a living. On top of all of that, all these people that live in these houses, even if they're only seasonal, they are going to do what every normal resident does. They're spending money here. They're going to the groceries, going to the movies, they're going to do any other kind of entertainment, they're going to restaurants. So, I mean, you understand what I'm trying to say here. They are contributing, especially in the rural areas, to the livelihood of the residents there. The next point that I want to stress is the higher de-transfer tax, does it really increase the tax revenue of the province? Now, I'm not the fiscal agent here for the province. I can just see what I can see from my side. And if there is a higher de-transfer tax, and I'm talking to these people, I just talked to a gentleman that was intending to move here last week, and he said, I'm not going to buy if it's another 5% up. And so, in my opinion, I can't see any increases in tax revenue if there are people saying, no, if this increase comes, it's too much, we're not coming. So, in my opinion, a higher de-transfer tax means fewer seasonal homes, less income tax through any businesses that are related to these seasonal homes, and we also should keep in mind, if they're not building these homes, there's also less property tax for the province. So, in my mind, the conclusion for this is the higher provincial de-transfer tax does not help the low-income housing. The higher provincial de-transfer tax damages the local economy. The higher provincial de-transfer tax equals lower property and lower income tax revenue. So we have less income in the province. It's doing the exact opposite of what this is intended to do. And also, as the previous presenter mentioned, it also makes the province less equal to the other provinces. We're basically pricing ourselves out. So if someone still wants to enjoy the Maritimes, They just go to New Brunswick and buy a house there, and then they come here and live over there. And so all the small business parts that I just mentioned are happening in New Brunswick, for example, and the property taxes are being paid there. Now, I don't only want to complain. A few suggestions from my side that might be just food for thought. How can we give the province more revenue, and how can we help people with low-income housing? Just a thought process in terms of how can people finance their homes? Can it be a mortgage that may be amortized in 40 or 50 years? Nova Scotia should think about equaling their provincial tax or detransfer tax to other provinces. I think I researched 2% is in other provinces also something that can happen. So yeah, definitely lowering and being equal to the other provinces. And that is my points here for today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I recognize MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate your presentation, very informed, and I tend to agree with you that the assumption that all the buyers will continue at the same scale to come up with the $12 million increase to revenue is flawed, especially because you're giving firsthand evidence from potential buyers that are looking probably now in different provinces, and we are standing out now as an outlier. I'm just wondering, to help with the government understanding the issue around how long it takes for the primary residence to take place, and we see this, like immigration files are taking now a couple of years longer than they used to. We're seeing that in all of our offices. But would it be helpful if the government considered changing that threshold? And just to be clear, we disagree with the whole D-transfer increase altogether, because we see the value of our seasonal purchasers, especially in rural communities and in Inverness and in Mahone Bay and some of these places that really depend on high value tourists that routinely come here and spend months and months and spend in the local economy. We think this is a terrible idea and sends the wrong signal for investment for our province. And we're already trying to get more investment. But given that you've laid out clearly how challenging it would be for a primary resident to prove that they're going to stay for 6 months, would it be helpful for the government to actually consider amending that to push that out to 18 months?
I mean, with 2.5 minutes remaining, I recognize Mr. Arant.
Thank you for your question. At this point, I think if we're considering this D-transfer tax, I think is a killer for the province's business. I think anything helps. The problem with putting a time limit on that, let's say, for example, I mentioned 18 months. It can be a lot longer in some respects. I suppose if you were to somehow find a mechanism to prove that even if you needed 19 months, you can still be exempt from that for somebody that really wants to be primary resident, I think that is certainly something to consider. There is another aspect of this timeline, and this is from a development perspective, because there are developers who set their developments up to attract not only people, as I mentioned, from inside the province, but also from outside the province. For example, in one of the developments that I'm part of, it's at the moment around 60-40 with interprovincial and outside of the province buyers. And if a developer sets himself up to do that, to attract these people, to have more revenue in the community, we have to keep in mind that developing a piece of land is a lot longer than 18 months. So just the development, we just did another subdivision approval from one of my clients. It's 4 months just to get it approved. So, and that is a very, very small subdivision of a lot into 3 other lots. So, there is plenty of time needed. I think rather not have that tax at all would help a lot more.
I recognize MLA Mumbercat.
Yeah, thank you, and hey, for your first time, well done. This was a presentation I think we all needed to hear from your perspective as a developer and someone who has made the decision to set roots here. But again, there's a theme with all of the bills that come through here, and you're here today, and this D-transfer tax idea has been brought up Was there any chance for you to provide any sort of feedback or consultation to the provincial government before this moment?
I recognize Mr. Arant.
Thank you. I'm learning. No, I heard about this, actually about these D-transfer tax 2 weeks ago. And I heard from a real estate agent about it. And it was nowhere in the news. And it was just by chance. And I was quite surprised.
Perfect timing. That concludes your time with us today. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and have a good day.
That concludes presentations for Bill 68. So I'm looking for a motion from the floor. What's that? Yep. Emily Wozni.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that a number of presenters who've raised concerns with Bill 68 as proposed and its negative impact on Nova Scotians. We would like to ensure that there is further public consultation on the issues contained within the bill. We believe that the proposals contained within the bill are important and merit further consideration. So I move that this bill not be referred back to the House and instead be returned to the sponsoring minister and their department for further analysis and development, including broad-based, respectful public engagement and expert analysis.
On the question, Emily Mumbercat.
Yeah, no, I want to speak in favor of the motion because obviously on this one, we've heard from stakeholders and groups and individuals across Nova Scotia. There is a real flaw with this that's going to impact the ability for people to sell their homes, the ability for people to come to this province. As we heard in the last presentation, people are now making the decision not to come. It's going to impact the people who are building houses. Obviously, there's issues around the timelines, as we heard in the last presentation, around the time somebody makes a decision to purchase land and the work that has to go through that. And again, for me, here we are again. Every bill that has come before this committee, there has been no opportunity for Nova Scotians, whether they were with businesses or as individuals, the opportunity for consultation before they had to come here. This was the first opportunity for people to come and provide feedback. And it's been, we've seen the government pull back pieces of legislation, whether it was around Auditor General or they say they're changing the wording around the Privacy Commissioner and that work. We haven't seen that wording yet, but in this one here, this one is directly going to impact economic development in this province, and this bill should not go forward. It should be pulled back and actually do real consultation with people across the province.
I recognize MLA Outhit.
Thank you. I wanted to speak to this bill as well in this motion, and I actually just gave my card to the gentleman who just spoke because I have confirmed with the finance minister, and we've all been told that the extensions are available for somebody who is moving here and wants to stay here, not a seasonal home, but if they're actually building to move here or to come back here, they certainly can get extensions to allow them time to complete their home. We do realize there's delays in building homes these days because of shortage of workers, but our focus is not necessarily having people come here to build seasonal homes, but if they are, Nova Scotia is certainly still a
it is.
We are allowed to speak in favor or against a motion, I believe.
You continue, please.
This is not. It's still affordable here for folks who want to come and build an occasional seasonal home, and I encounter those folks every weekend up in my neighborhood. But anyway, the main point is that this is trying to be done to provide more homes for Nova Scotians to buy or people who want to come here and stay here, be it from other countries or other provinces, and extensions are available. So thank you, Chair.
I recognize Emily Mumbercat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the member, and I appreciate the information that he provided. But again, it goes to my point is that we're finding that out right now. Right now. right? Like in this committee, when it should have went out for consultation across the province. So individuals that have come here to present would have had that information before they came here. But this has been the theme from day one. It's no information, no opportunity to consult. And on this one, particularly, this one, in my opinion, is going to impact economic development and the ability, it's going to hurt Nova Scotians in the long run. So I support my colleague's motion to not move this forward. And I would encourage the government to go out and actually consult on this one.
No. Oh, MLA Hamid.
Thank you. I just wanted to add as to why I think that we this should not go back to the House just yet. I believe that the last speaker was the first who's like a builder, actively, involved in building of property to speak about this. And I think saying that it's still affordable to build after an expert just came and told us that it's going to make it not affordable is a little bit offensive, because we've heard from the expert directly. So anyways, just saying that there obviously needs to be more consultation, and so I support my colleague in this not going back to the House right away.
Ready for the question? The motion moved by MLA Wozni. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The chair votes nay. The motion is declined. I recognize MLA Vanixon. You can ask it after she makes it.
Thank you, Chair. I move that Bill number 68, Financial Measures 2025 Act, be reported back to the House.
I recognize MLA Wozni.
I'd like to move that we have a recorded vote on this motion.
There's been a motion for a recorded vote. Any questions on the motion? MLA Burns for a recorded vote. MLA Burns.
Yes.
MLA Vanixon.
Yes.
MLA McGowan.
Yes.
MLA Outhit.
Yes.
MLA Mumbercat.
No.
MLA Rankin.
No.
MLA Hamid.
No.
MLA Wozni.
No.
The chair votes yes. Motion approved. We go back to Bill number 6, Agriculture, Energy, and Natural Resources, and Act respecting. All remaining presenters are 10 minutes. Now we have Mr. Brad Rend. I recognize Brad Rend.
Thank you very much for your time. I'll try and be relatively brief. Excuse me. I'm trained as a geologist. Well, so I want to speak about uranium in particular. I'm trained as a geologist. I spent some time working in the industry, in particular in uranium exploration. And I also have a small amount of specialized education in uranium exploration and geochemistry. The part I want to talk about is a little background. One of my concerns with uranium, no, I'm going to back up again here. In general, I'm very in favor of mining and mineral exploration and the nuclear industry as a whole. To the point that I would almost say that we have an ethical responsibility to have mining in this province as we use resources in this province. And therefore, we should have some of the implications of using those resources in our province. When it comes to uranium exploration currently in this province, I am incredibly strongly opposed to it. Uranium is a little different than a lot of stuff we go exploring for. When it comes to the surface and is oxidized, it is very soluble. I mean, depending what's there with it, you can approach like table salt levels of solubility. This means that uranium is very mobile and it can move very long distances. We already in this province have a problem with groundwater contamination with uranium that exists. I hate the word naturally, but so be it. And I will happily concede that exploration in itself poses a relatively low risk of further contamination. But if we're going to do exploration, that kind of implies that we're also very open for mining. And so my reason for why I'm strongly objected to it is from my personal interactions with the Department of Natural Resources, and none of them in the mining industry in this province, but also my interactions with other groups that interact with the Department of Natural Resources is that they are not well equipped to be a regulator, which is something that uranium requires. They're a facilitator of industry, and we know from various FOIPOPs that they do not even follow their own internal regulations and protocols. This is very well documented, so I don't mind kind of saying it. And also, I took this opportunity when it came up to revisit a document that I had not seen in a long time, and that was the West Ray inquiry. And although I think the language is probably a bit harsh for the current thing, I think most of it still rings true. So I come back to the department as an adequate regulatory body. I don't put that on their technical expertise. I put that on their culture, which is much harder to change, and their political backing. And their political backing, I don't mean any particular color of party. That's a generational issue, I think. When I looked at the recommendations, the West Ray inquiry, there are a lot of recommendations there that I think would be prudent to take into effect, or to take in if we were going to move forward on uranium exploration. But that's most of what I have to say, I guess.
Question, Emily Wasley.
Mr. Redden, thank you for sharing your testimony with us. I'm wondering if you could elaborate. We have any number of very notable reports in inquiries in Nova Scotia. Sadly, it's far too common for documents that have been constructed with rigor and expert input and oversight to kind of go to live on dusty shelves and not actually change the way that we live and do what we do here in Nova Scotia. I think the West Ray inquiry is probably worded as harshly as it was because of the profound negative impact it had on our province. There was a profound loss of human life that needed to be commented on in that inquiry. And so the urgency with which it makes recommendations is notable. And I'm wondering if you can, noting that, it's worth looking at West Ray, what recommendations, perhaps yet unrealized, is it wise for us to take into consideration before we hurtle down the road to passing Bill 6 that we might need to sit with before we lift a ban on uranium exploration?
With 5 minutes remaining, I recognize Brad Rend.
Thank you. I expected to get much farther than just the introduction of that report before I had something resonate with me. And one of the things it talked about there was the strong political push to have that mine developed at West Ray, and how that cascaded into a number of other things. There's a couple of recommendations. One that I thought was really good that even if it is in place, I expect is not utilized enough, was to have an expert, unaffiliated with anything, available for consultation by the minister on an ad hoc basis, which I realize it was worded more robustly than that, but anytime you're into a technical field, the way you filter information is strongly influenced by your own personal biases. To kind of give an example, when I was getting some of my education on uranium, it was actually one of the geologists from Nova Scotia DNR who was one of the presenters, and their comment was something to the effect of, we should have uranium exploration in Nova Scotia because we don't know where all the uranium deposits are, or the uranium sources are, which is a fair comment. But we also have several 100,000 water wells in this province that do not regularly get tested or ever get tested for uranium content. I know the town of Bridgetown had a problem with uranium content in their municipal water supply, and they had to drill extra wells. And St. Croix also has a long history of having far too much uranium in their drinking water. So there's a multitude, and I didn't really focus on the recommendations when I read the report. It was gave it to read and was like, oh, this is lots of good stuff here.
I recognize MLA Membercrat.
Thank you, and good to see you. We've had the opportunity to meet before. Thank you for your service to your community too as well. And we're kind of in the same boat because I support mining. I think there's opportunity across the province. As a government, we put regulations in to ensure that companies had to pay their upfront costs for remediation. So there's still some work around that. But you did mention, and it's something that I think about as we go through these deliberations, whether we're talking about uranium or we're talking about fracking, just this message that we're just going to remove all of these regulations when we don't have the capacity actually at a government level to regulate this stuff. So I guess my question is what do you think the department needs to do, or what do you think the investment would be to actually, if we were to start exploring for uranium, what does the government need to have in place?
I recognize Brad Rend.
Thank you. I did not prepare nearly enough to make a really an educated comment on this, but I will comment on exploration companies as a whole. They are incredibly lean organizations, especially if you're trying to compare them to anything government associated. But even most businesses, the number of hats you wear in the course of a day would outstrip almost any other position you ever are anywhere else. And to try and deal with everything and do everything at once, there's so many balls in the air, you will inevitably drop some. And what doesn't get inspected are often environmental regulations. I say this from my experience out in the field. And it's not that these organizations are malicious or are making bad faith attempts at what they're doing. They work very hard to do the best job they can. But I also know from working on mining development projects, that we always knew when the inspector was coming. And the 3 days ahead of time, you ran around and made sure everything was good. I mean, we made efforts to make sure everything was good in general, but you double-checked in that couple of days leading up. You know who we took really good care of was the leaseholders, because they inspected much more than Department of Mines did, and they did it much more thoroughly.
20 seconds left. Yes, sir. I recognize MLA Membercrat.
Oh, let's just, again, thank you. It's nice to hear folks come in with the experience in the field. So, and again, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Redden. Next presenter is Laura Dunn for 10 minutes again. I recognize Laura Dunn.
Sorry. Good morning. I want to thank you for having me here at this session. I want to thank Brad Rend for speaking and bringing the expertise and the head to this hearing. I'm here from the heart. First of all, I want to say thank you to the new Houston government for doing some really positive things of late on domestic abuse victims shelters, on covering mental health under Medicare, on the big offshore wind projects, on acting on provincial trade barriers, and for removing from Bill 6, I believe, the aspect of it reintroducing offshore drilling. These are all really good things to do. There's good evidence for them, and it's good politics. I'm here today to talk about the not-so-good aspects of Bill 6. In particular, I'll focus on fracking, as I only have 5 minutes. I have no particular expertise in any of this, but what I do have is I try to stay informed on issues and listen to the evidence, pro and con. And what I bring here in terms of heart is that I have 2 daughters. And those 2 daughters are of an age now, they're in their 20s, and they're starting to wonder about what their lives will look like. And I tell you, the despair is terrible to witness. The world that we are leaving to them is terrible. That's why I don't understand why this government, which is doing so many positive things, wants to revisit the issue of fracking. Not only is it dangerous in terms of seismic activity and potential contamination of water sources, and half of us in Nova Scotia, myself included, depend on well water for our drinking water, but it contributes methane. Natural gas produced by fracking is to a great extent methane, which is the most important climate change gas. And my two daughters, they don't know. No, they're pretty sure that while they would like to have children, this world that we're giving to them, they don't trust it to be a place where they want children to be born into. And that is absolutely heartbreaking for me. So I have driven here through the rain. I got up at 6 in the North Shore of Nova Scotia, got in my car and drove here through the rain to be here to tell you that these things matter to us everyday people. I don't understand what the push is to revisit the moratorium when you had such overwhelming opposition to fracking, 11, 12 years ago. Back then, I looked it up in some news articles. It said that 70% of Nova Scotians in 2013 that were polled, 70% were opposed to fracking. 72% of PC voters. This is not what your public wants either. More recent research, and I'm just a reader of this stuff. I'm not a scientist like Mr. Redden. There was a report in the Journal of the Seismology Society of America, which I take as a pretty serious scientific journal, which reports well peer-reviewed evidence. 90% of the seismic events over magnitude 3.0 that have shaken Alberta and BC in recent years were triggered by fracking. We are in no way going to be invulnerable to these negative aspects of fracking. I believe that we all are engaging in some magical thinking that we can have these quick fixes to our energy problems, but we can't. We have excellent renewable resources, and I sort of sometimes feel a wall comes down when you say that. Those are harder to do maybe, or maybe it's just culturally harder to do. We just think oil and gas can get up and running and bring us the jobs and bring us the economic development we want faster and more securely. The cost is too high, and the renewables are proven. So what I would ask this committee to do is to listen to the evidence, look at the evidence, but also listen to us, the people who want to make sure that there's a future for our communities here in Nova Scotia, and in particular to young adults like my two daughters who are in despair about that future. I want to show them. I drove through the rain, and I'm going home through freezing rain back to Malagash, because I can only do this. This is all I can do is come and plead with you to please do the right thing. Thank you, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. Looking for speakers? Any questions? Well, no questions. You're off the hook easy. Thank you. And our last presenter on this bill is Katherine Chervan, and it's a virtual presentation.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
Thank you. You ready to begin?
Thank you. I appreciate the committee taking the time to hear me, and I also am very, very happy to be able to speak to you. My name is Kathy Chervan. I am a retired family doctor, a mother and a grandmother, and I'm speaking today both as a private citizen and as a member of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, otherwise known as CAPE. I did watch the majority of the presentations during the day yesterday. I have not seen the ones this morning, except for a few minutes of the last presenter. But what I'm going to say will be very much in line with what I heard from that last presenter. Yesterday, you heard detailed presentations from two of my colleagues, Drs. Lorette Geldenhuis and Nancy Covington. And I'm going to try not to repeat what other people have said, but to provide some of my own reflection. And if there's time, I would welcome any questions or comments. So, as a family doctor and a grandmother of 5 and a mother of 5, my main motivation and reasons for speaking are the long-term health of Nova Scotians, the health and preservation of our environment, our air, our water, our land, and our coast. And as I assume all of the committee realizes, these are key to the health and prosperity of our province and foundational to the health of the people. I'm also concerned, deeply concerned about the treaty rights of the Mi'kmaq people. And I just have a short quote from the letter that was sent to the Premier from the Mi'kmaq chiefs. All resource extraction developments and strategic level planning decisions impacting the unceded lands must be accompanied by consultations and discussions of compensation and mitigation. And that has not happened. All of us have been scrambling to respond to this unexpected proposal and bill to lift the ban on uranium mining and fracking. And I want to preface the rest of my remarks by saying that I recognize and agree with the need for economic development in our province, but it cannot come at the expense of our health and well-being, and that of the environment. And my worry is that lifting the ban, specifically on uranium exploration and fracking, will mean spending money that could have been invested in a green and sustainable economy for uncertain economic benefit and an unknown risk of very long-term harm. And I'll briefly digress because aside from economic benefit, the other rationales we've heard specifically for uranium exploration include the potential medical uses and knowing where uranium is so we can mitigate harms from radon. Uranium for medical uses, I have a document that I will send to the committee, a fact sheet produced by the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility. And in brief, there's no need for more uranium mining to provide medical isotopes. And the quote is, "Hospitals do not need nuclear power for isotopes and never have. Isotopes, radioactive materials that are medically useful, can be produced by accelerators or small research reactors." And these days, many medical procedures do not involve radioactivity, and those are preserved. So you can treat cancer through, and I'm not a cancer specialist, but you can treat cancer with means other than through radioactive isotopes. You don't need isotopes to create radiation treatments. And in my opinion, we don't need to know where the uranium is to mitigate the current risk from radon. We all need to test our basements, even if we're currently in a presumed low-risk area. And my colleagues have outlined the risks of exposure to radon. And I fear that mining companies and the Mining Association view of safety is short-sighted. All mines have defined lifespans, and it wasn't easy for me to get information on how long one could expect a mine to generate economic activity. Maybe it's 10 or 15 years at the most. Maybe it's more, it could be even less. I spent part of my career in Northern Ontario, and Elliott Lake, the uranium mining towning there, went through incredible boom-bust cycles because of uranium. It started in the mid-50s, and 5 or 6 years later, the uranium market collapsed. The town went from 30,000 to 6,000. There was a brief resurgence in the 1970s, but after that, all mining was shut down in the early 1990s. But the tailings remain hazardous for thousands of years. And this is not the legacy we want to bequeath to our future generations. And we have heard about mining methods such as in situ leaching, which do not create tailings. However, in situ leaching is very similar to fracking. It involves drilling holes into an ore body and then using either explosives or hydraulic fracturing to create pathways. They pump in a liquid and then recover it, and then the metal is precipitated out from that solvent. And Dr. Emmerman, who's a geophysicist and retired university professor, says the solvent will leach all kinds of other elements in addition to uranium, such as arsenic, and this has the potential to contaminate our wells. And when we think about fracking for shale gas, there's a lot of health and earthquake risks, but from my point of view, the main issue is we cannot continue to add new fossil fuel sources if we want to have a modern, healthy province. We have to turn our efforts towards green energy. And the good news from a presentation by Dr. Millie Roy, who's an ophthalmologist, a member of CAPE, and also a certified climate reality leader. In 2020, the World Economic Forum said for the first time in history, renewable energy has become cheaper than fossil fuels. And specifically in Canada, I think we could focus on clean energy development, which would bring climate, health, and economics co-benefits while achieving energy independence from the USA. I'm not sure where I am with my time, but I'm almost done. And I do have thoughts as to investments in a sustainable economy. Obviously, I'm not an economist or a business person, but tourism, agriculture, small farmers. I happen to volunteer in an organic farm, which is a shoestring operation, could really benefit from more investment. We have universities, the knowledge economy, land-based sustainable fish farms, more investment in transit. I ran in the municipal election. I heard a lot of interest in trains as a potential option for sustainable transport. And I would say investing in our small businesses, particularly including Indigenous owned and led businesses. So I am confident that we all share a love of our province, a commitment to future generations. I urge and encourage the government not to add to the climate emergency by oil and gas exploration, and not to explore or mine uranium and create thousand-year hazardous waste, but to invest in a green and sustainable future for our children and grandchildren. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Chervan. We appreciate you. Your hands are up. You're happy you're finished. Thank you very much. We appreciate your information. Unfortunately, our time is up for your presentation today. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and I'll send written materials.
Thank you very much. That concludes presenters on this bill. I recognize MLA Wozni.
Oh, no, I have a motion. Okay.
I'm ready for it, yeah.
Chair, on Bill 6, we've heard a wide spectrum of presenters from every walk of life imaginable, people with very technical expertise in the field of resource extraction, people close to the land, because of their indigeneity or their lifelong sense of connection and activism and care for the province. And I can think of few pieces of legislation with the potential to split our province down the middle than this one. We'd like to ensure that there is further public consultation on this bill in particular, given how explosive the feelings on it are. We appreciate that there are elements of this bill that are important and merit worthy consideration. However, we move that this bill not be referred back to the House and instead be returned to the sponsoring ministers and their respective departments for further analysis and development, including broad-based, respectful public engagement and expert environmental and technical analyses.
Ready for the question? Moved by MLA Wozni. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Nay. The chair votes nay. Motion defeated. I'm looking at MLA Vanixon.
Thank you, Chair. I move that Bill number 6, an act respecting agriculture, energy, and natural resources, be reported back to the House.
Questions? MLA Wozni?
Recorded vote.
Recorded vote's been called for. No further questions on the bill, on the motion. MLA Burns?
Yes.
Can you repeat it again? The mic wasn't on.
Yes.
Thank you. MLA Vanixon?
Yes.
MLA McGowan?
Yes.
MLA Outhit?
Yes.
MLA Mumbercrat?
No.
MLA Hamid?
No.
MLA Wozni?
No.
And the chair votes in favor. The motion is approved. Our next bill, our last one, is Bill 12, Advanced Education and Research, an act respecting, and a 10-minute presentation by Rick Williams. I recognize Rick Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to present. I am here to support the government's more hands-on approach to strengthening linkages between government's policy goals and the contributions of universities to social and economic development in Nova Scotia. From 2009 to 2013, I served as Deputy Minister for Policy and Priorities in this Nova Scotia government. In the context then of a looming fiscal crisis, one issue that took up a lot of my time over the 4 years was the state of the university system. I was surprised to find at the outset a strong consensus around the Deputy Minister's table that the universities were, on the one hand, unable or unwilling to control their cost growth, and on the other, not delivering sufficient return on investment for the province. In 2010, after the previous government's tuition freeze that saw operating grants more than double, per-student provincial funding was 40% higher in Nova Scotia than the national average. Despite the grant growing by 11% per year, an external audit found that of the 10 universities, only one was financially healthy. 3 were stable, related as stable, quote unquote, and 6 ranged from seriously stressed to near insolvency. For the weaker institutions, the challenge was debt levels that could only be sustained with annual government contributions above and beyond their operating grants. In addition to financial challenges, we faced daunting demographic trends. Nova Scotia was facing a 20% drop in 18-year-olds graduating from high school, so competing for more out-of-province and international students was perceived then to be a necessity. After intensive planning and consultation work with CONSUP, the Council of University Presidents, we arrived at a new MOU with a funding formula that included a 10% grant reduction over 3 years, offset by tuition increases, low-interest credit instruments, and a substantial fund to support program rationalization and cross-system collaboration. You'll remember that we also rolled the Agricultural College into the Dalhousie at the time. However, this proved to be at best a stopgap plan. In 2012, a further audit confirmed that the system was headed for a $100 million deficit by 2015. Planning with CONSUP for the next MOU included serious work on system restructuring options. However, this work came to an end with the 2013 election. Through all this planning, we did not anticipate the explosion in international student recruitment that has carried the system for the past 10 years. In my view, however, this windfall did not resolve the underlying structural issues, as confirmed by the recent Auditor General's finding that, quote, a pattern of year-end deficits and cash flow challenges has continued unchecked for certain universities, unquote, and collectively, universities owe $370 million in long-term debt. I would add that Nova Scotia today still spends more per capita. Taxpayers contribute more per capita than any other province in Canada, 27% above the national average. And now we find that reliance on high numbers of international students cannot be taken for granted. The current risk outlook now includes growing geopolitical tensions, reduced immigration flows, housing issues, a prospect of possible recession, and rising government deficits. As in 2010, we today confront a difficult reality. Every one of our universities is too big to fail in its local community, trapping the government in short-term and expensive Band-Aid solutions. I support the government's intention to improve accountability and exercise more direct influence over decision-making in individual schools. But these measures may not address the underlying systemic issues. As is too often observed, if we don't know where we're going, any direction will get us there, and every institution can find its own pathway. In 2013, the Ivany Report identified, the Ivany Report identified our universities as, quote, one of Nova Scotia's greatest comparative advantages, unquote, and called on the province to, quote, view its high concentration of universities and colleges as a fundamental asset in growing our economy, unquote. I seriously question whether this potential can be achieved without stronger system-wide governance, a more robust and sustainable financial foundation, and some greater degree of institutional integration. Rather than top-down, one-off interventions, I urge the government to consider the potential benefits of an Ivany Commission-type planning process led by independent experts to engage university executives, faculty and student organizations, and university communities in the development of a shared vision for a financially sustainable higher education system, appropriately structured and adequately resourced to meet Nova Scotia's current and future challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamid. I recognize MLA Wozni.
Mr. Williams, thank you for your appearance here today, or Dr. Williams, I apologize, for your appearance here today and your testimony. I appreciate your candor in addressing a number of longstanding structural issues with the way that universities in Nova Scotia are funded. We definitely heard concerns in that respect from other presenters on Bill 12. I take to heart your urging that something needs to be done. Like we have to stop sort of pushing this down the road. There's sort of a reckoning that has to occur. To make sure that Nova Scotia universities are sustainable and viable in the long run, and that there's a return for the public money that is granted to universities to operate. I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts. The Auditor General, in her report on university funding in Nova Scotia, aimed the lens for responsibility for the state of the relative lack of accountability and oversight really on the minister and the department. Really had very, the commentary on universities was not scathing. That universities somehow there were mass system failings in terms of university governance and oversight of the funds that it is entrusted with, but rather the issue was that the minister and the department, despite having very considerable powers of oversight under current statute, failed to exercise those powers. I'm curious, Bill 12 seeks to hand a minister and a department that already don't exercise the power that they have to ensure accountability and transparency, for public the expenditure of public funds. How, in your view, does giving the government even exceptional or unprecedented powers of oversight serve to address the structural issues that you flagged when it already hasn't used the powers that it already has under current statute?
With 2 minutes remaining, I recognize Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for ministers in this situation. I spent 4 years myself trying to work with universities to address these their individual issues, but also to get them to commit to structural changes. And it was, I'm going to be very frank here, every president of every university, their job is directed by their board is to defend their individual university, not to help others, not to help the province. By their very nature, internal governance structures, universities have great difficulty, including dealing with internal cost growth, largely on the wage and salary side of the equation. It is very, very difficult politically for any government to take on a university to really seriously. There was, for example, in the mid-1990s, a concerted effort to create a University of Halifax. There was a commission set up in the late 90s. It did manage to roll tons into Dalhousie, but that was basically the only real change that was achieved. It is it's just a conundrum. It's a Gordian knot, and that's why rather than the government, the minister trying to step in and fix it, I think they will fail. I think they will be battled to the standstill. I think it's rather, when I mention an Ivany Commission type of process, what I'm talking about there is bringing the public and the stakeholders with us in, first of all, understanding how serious the problem is, that we have an unsustainable system which is underperforming relative to what we need from it, and we need to build a consensus, public acceptance, social license, however you want to put it, before governments can really step in and intervene. I challenge
Order,
any.
please. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Unfortunately, that concludes your time. Thank you for coming in today. Appreciate it. Information. That concludes our presenters on this bill as well. Looking for a motion. MLA Wozni.
Chair, we've heard a diversity of perspective on this. I think one of the things that we've, a thread that runs throughout the testimony received is that this bill appeared suddenly, reflected a dearth of advanced planning and consultation in its development. And, you know, we've heard student, faculty, other stakeholders all indicate their willingness to be part of enhanced transparency and accountability in terms of the delivery of post-secondary education in the province. However, that has not occurred at this point, and there are grave concerns that this legislation stands to have unforeseen and far-reaching negative impacts if enacted as currently constituted. So for that reason, we're recognizing that change is warranted, whether or not this is the right thing at the right time. I move that this bill not be referred back to the House and instead be returned to the sponsoring ministers and their respective departments for further analysis and development, including respectful public engagement, particularly of students, the public, faculty, and expert witnesses with technical background in university governance and accountability.
Questions on the motion? Ready for the question? Motion by MLA Wozni. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed signify nay. Nay. And the chair votes nay. Motion is declined. MLA Vanixon.
Thank you, Chair. I move that Bill number 12, an act respecting advanced education and research, be reported back to the House.
MLA Wozni.
I move for a recorded vote.
Recorded votes called for. Any questions on the motion? MLA Burns.
Yes.
MLA Vanixon.
Yes.
MLA McGowan.
Yes.
MLA Outhit.
Yes.
MLA Hamid.
No.
MLA Wozni.
No.
And the chair votes yes. Motion's approved. This concludes our Public Bills Committee meeting for today, March 18, 2025. I'd like to thank all committee members and presenters for joining us here today and yesterday. Meeting is adjourned.